Zuzu Verk was born on April 22, 1995, in Keller, Texas. She grew up in a warm and loving family alongside her parents, Glenn Verk and Lori, and her older brother, Miles. Her brother described her as the brightest light in their lives. Zuzu attended Timber Creek High School and, after graduating, moved to Alpine, Texas, to study at the local university. She chose to major in conservation biology, driven by her passion for protecting the planet's wild spaces and creatures. Her academic achievements were impressive. She had recently made the dean's list and was in the process of transferring to Texas University for her senior year. She was not only a dedicated student but also ambitious, idealistic, and focused on her goals. Her love for nature influenced her vision for the future. After college, she dreamed of living in Japan, where she could combine her passion for travel with her environmental advocacy. While in Alpine, she became involved with Fabian, a young man 4 years her senior. At first, the relationship was based solely on attraction, but gradually became more complicated. Robert's charm attracted Zuzu, but her family, particularly her mother Lori and brother Miles, had some concerns about him. Lori viewed Robert as self-centered and dismissive, while Miles felt he was controlling and worried that he didn't support Zuzu's ambitions, particularly her desire to leave Alpine and pursue her dreams. Zuzu herself had similar worries. While she remained in the relationship, she confided in her mother that she couldn't envision a future with Robert. It felt more like a relationship of convenience than one based on genuine connection. Despite this, she remains kind and hopeful, reflecting her personality as she prepares to inform Robert about her transfer and her next choice. The last conversation Lori had with Zuzu was on October 10, 2016. Zuzu was excited to share that she was transferring to Texas University and ending her relationship with Robert. He had planned to take her to a movie the following night. Lori had no idea that this would be the last time she would ever hear her daughter's voice. As days went by without any word from Zuzu, worry turned into panic. Zuzu was known for always responding to messages, so her silence was unusual. Her parents, deeply concerned, started contacting everyone they knew who might have seen her. When Lori reached out to Robert, he said he hadn't seen Zuzu and mentioned that he was giving her some space. On October 14, 2016, Zuzu was officially reported missing. A massive search effort began, involving local authorities, state officials, and hundreds of volunteers. Helicopters flew over the desert, horseback riders searched difficult trails, and search teams extended their efforts hundreds of miles, even into Mexico. Flyers were distributed throughout the town, and a $100,000 reward was offered in hopes of finding Zuzu. However, hopes began to fade over time. The investigation began to focus on Fabian. He told detectives that on the evening of October 11th, he and Zuzu had dinner at his apartment. He claimed that their dinner took a negative turn when he mentioned an ex-girlfriend, prompting Zuzu to leave in the early morning hours. He stated that he called her later but decided to stop trying to reach her when she didn't respond. This account raised suspicions with the police. A key witness was John Franco, a neighbor who resides downstairs from Robert. John reported seeing Zuzu enter Robert's apartment the night she disappeared. He could hear familiar sounds coming from Robert's apartment, such as chatter and laughter, but there was one strange moment. He heard Robert shout, "Shut up," breaking the usual atmosphere. Later, around 4 a.m., John saw Robert leaving the apartment alone, while Zuzu's car remained parked outside. John also recalled hearing what he thought were arguments and odd thuds from above, details that would later prove crucial. When investigators confronted Robert with this new information, his story changed. He now claimed that after the argument about the ex-girlfriend, he had left to drive to Dairy Queen to think things over. He said that when he returned, Zuzu was still there but left shortly after. This inconsistency raised enough suspicion for the detectives to request a search of Robert's apartment, to which he agreed. Inside, they found disturbing evidence. The bed was completely stripped of linens, and items like the mattress pad, clothes, and sheets had a strong smell of bleach. This painted a troubling picture. Investigators began to suspect that Zuzu's disappearance might be more complicated than they had initially thought. As the investigation expanded, a notable friend of Robert's, Chris Estrada, came to the group's attention. Their friendship dated back to high school, and this closeness made Chris a subject of scrutiny. Concerns grew after Chris appeared on national television on December 6, 2016, during an episode of Crime Watch Daily. Viewers and authorities noted his rigid posture, awkward mannerisms, and forced expressions. Phone records showed that Robert had called Chris at 3:15 a.m. on October 12, the same morning Zuzu went missing. During the investigation, Chris revealed that Robert had requested to borrow his credit card the day before, claiming to need it to buy plastic tarps for a painting project. This explanation raised suspicions. Why would anyone need painting supplies late at night? Investigators found the reasoning questionable and the timing suspicious. Another important witness, Brittany, told investigators that Chris had arrived at her apartment around midnight on October 13, appearing shaken. He looked pale and anxious, as if he had witnessed something disturbing. When she asked what was wrong, Chris allegedly replied, "Don't interfere." Despite these troubling signs, the case hit a dead end. All the evidence was circumstantial. There was no body and no concrete proof linking Robert to any crime. Zuzu's family, feeling devastated and desperate for answers, held press conferences urging Robert to come forward and help, but he remained silent. Weeks turned into months. However, on February 3, 2017, 3 months after Zuzu went missing, everything changed. While patrolling a remote area of Brewster County near Alpine, the police noticed something unusual, a disturbed patch of soil. As they approached, they saw plastic sticking out of the dirt, along with a blue sock and a piece of dark fabric. They immediately alerted the authorities. When investigators arrived and began to dig, their worst fears were realized. Inside a shallow grave, wrapped in a plastic painter's drop cloth, lay the body of Zuzu. DNA tests later confirmed her identity. Zuzu, a vibrant young woman with dreams of studying at Texas University, wanting to live in Japan, and who loved the stars and the earth, had finally been found. The plastic wrap used to conceal her body matched the type Robert had purchased at Dollar General using Chris's borrowed credit card. This was the crucial evidence. Within 24 hours of the discovery, Robert was arrested and charged with evidence tampering and abuse of a corpse. 2 days later, Chris was also arrested in Phoenix, Arizona, facing similar charges. The charges against Robert were soon upgraded to murder. In April 2018, Chris agreed to plead guilty and testify against his best friend, Robert, and he did not deny his role in the crime. In contrast, Robert maintained his innocence, pleading not guilty. His defense attorney argued that there was no direct physical evidence, no fingerprints or DNA linking Robert to the murder. However, prosecutors pointed to Robert's suspicious behavior after Zuzu's disappearance. He bleached sheets, changed his story multiple times, and showed an unusual interest in the investigation. A coworker even testified that Robert, who was once calm, became erratic after Zuzu went missing, frequently inquiring about law enforcement activities. This behavior indicated not a concerned boyfriend, but someone anxious about their own involvement in a crime. The trial was painful for Zuzu's family but also brought some closure as the grim truth emerged. Zuzu's memory would endure, cherished by her family as a vibrant young woman with dreams and aspirations that were tragically cut short. On the third day of the trial, silence fell over the courtroom as Chris took the witness stand and made a confession that would alter the case's direction. He described a night marked by desperation, phone calls, and a secret that was never meant to be shared. Chris testified that Robert called him late at night, insisting it was a life-or-death situation. During their conversation, Robert recounted a distressing evening with Zuzu that turned violent. According to Chris, an argument led to Robert strangling Zuzu. As she gasped for air and eventually stopped breathing, Robert panicked. Chris claimed that Robert attempted to perform CPR, but it was too late. Following this incident, Chris testified that Robert entered survival mode, attempting to conceal his actions. Claims that Zuzu's death was an accident seem disingenuous. Strangulation is a deliberate and conscious act, not a knee-jerk reaction. Chris confessed that Robert repeatedly called him, pleading for help in disposing of Zuzu's body. At one point, Robert even showed up at Chris's home in Alpine, begging for help and urging him not to go to the police. Although Chris claimed he refused to assist Robert, he admitted that he did not report what he knew, a decision that would haunt the investigation. While he was not physically involved in Zuzu's death, his silence prolonged the suffering of her family and hindered the pursuit of justice. Whether motivated by fear, loyalty, or moral indecision, Chris chose silence over honesty, leaving Zuzu's family in the dark for an extended period. In an unexpected turn of events, a new witness took the stand in the courtroom. Roy Roman, who once shared a cell with Robert at Brewster County Jail, testified that Robert had privately admitted to killing Zuzu. He claimed Robert was motivated by Zuzu's discovery of secrets he wanted to keep hidden. Specifically, she had learned about a potential romantic involvement between him and Chris, and she threatened to expose it. Fearing this revelation, Roy stated that Robert decided to silence Zuzu permanently. Roy described Robert as distraught in his cell, repeatedly saying that he hadn't meant to do that. On May 8, 2019, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Robert Fabian was found guilty on all counts and received a life sentence in prison, along with an additional 29 years for tampering with evidence. Chris Estrada, who had earlier accepted a plea deal and testified against Robert, was sentenced to 42 months in prison and fined for tampering with evidence and evading law enforcement. While Zuzu's family felt a sense of justice from the verdict, it did not bring them peace. Their beloved daughter was gone forever, and nothing could change that. In the midst of their grief, they received a painful reminder of what could have been, a letter from Texas University confirming Zuzu's acceptance into a program she had worked tirelessly to join. It was her dream, but tragically, she would never live to experience it. To honor Zuzu, the university renamed its amphitheater to Zuzu's Place and established a scholarship in natural resource management in her name, celebrating her dedication to protecting the natural world. However, the emotional scars from Zuzu's murder remain profound. Her brother, Miles, thought of her often and cherished small memories, like her washing dishes or her goodnight wishes, which now served as sweet but wistful reminders of the times they had together. Zuzu's family, although heartbroken, remains strong and is incredibly grateful for the ongoing support from the Alpine community. They acknowledged that without this support, they might not have survived the darkest times of their lives. Zuzu was a visionary, full of dreams of a life rich with purpose, travel, and making a difference. Her story serves as a heartbreaking warning: never remain in relationships that stifle your growth. Never let anyone prevent you from becoming your true self. Zuzu was close to achieving the freedom and life she dreamed of, but in the end she didn't succeed. Her story also reminds us to protect our dreams, stay independent, and never let anyone make us choose between love and freedom. The drive to achieve one's goals at any cost can lead people to commit shocking acts and betrayals. It can be hard to grasp the lengths someone will go to achieve their dreams, especially when it endangers the lives of others. Today's story is about a tragic murder that shocked all of Brazil. The impact was felt most deeply in the small town of São João Batista. For this close-knit community, the crime is one of the most brutal and unprecedented events in history. Flavia Godinho Mafra was born on April 19, 1996, in São João Batista, a peaceful town in the southern Brazilian state of Santa Catarina, grew up in Canalinha. As the youngest child in a large, loving family, her parents worked hard to support their children. Flavia was kind, friendly, and outgoing. She excelled in her studies and had a passion for music, always surrounded by friends. From a young age, she dreamed of becoming a teacher and had no plans to leave her hometown. After attending a local teacher training college, she graduated and began teaching at the elementary school she had once attended. At 20, Flavia met Valdeli Mafra. They quickly fell in love and started dating. In the summer of 2019, Valdeli proposed, and Flavia happily accepted. They got married that October, and just 2 months later, they received wonderful news: they were going to have a baby. Their joy was beyond words. In another development, Rosalba Maria Grime was born in 1994 in Canalinha, a town in Santa Catarina. There is little information available about her early life or family background. From a young age, she was seen as unusual. People often felt she exaggerated stories, fabricated achievements, and sought to appear more important, making it hard for them to take her seriously. As she grew older, Rosalba increasingly craved attention by playing on others' sympathy. She would create tales of personal struggles and serious health issues she claimed to be facing. In one troubling incident, she tried to prevent a boyfriend from leaving by telling him she had a terminal illness, begging for his companionship during what she described as her final months. When her deception continued for a long time, she suddenly claimed to have made a miraculous recovery. In 2017, Rosalba married Zomir Schiestel, a quiet, shy man who was easygoing and agreeable. Rosalba had taken the initiative to propose the marriage, and Zomir simply nodded in agreement. They moved into a small home in a peaceful residential area on the outskirts of town. Rosalba worked as a librarian at a local school. However, her co-workers had mixed feelings about her, primarily because of her dominant demeanor and reputation for being dishonest. For the first 3 years of their marriage, Rosalba struggled to conceive, with doctors suggesting that she might never be able to have children. Therefore, when she discovered in the fall of 2019 that she was pregnant, she was filled with joy. She quickly shared the exciting news with her family, friends, and co-workers. Overcome with happiness, Rosalba even posted a picture of her positive pregnancy test on social media, announcing it to everyone she knew. In the weeks that followed, she was inundated with congratulations for her and the baby. Her husband and family treated her like a queen, shielding her from stress, taking care of everything for her. Even co-workers who had not been particularly friendly with her before began to show kindness, recognizing how long she had hoped to be a mother. In December of that year, Rosalba faced a heartbreaking event. She suffered a miscarriage in her 3rd month of pregnancy, leaving her deeply shocked and silent about her loss. Instead of sharing her pain, she chose to act as if she were still pregnant. She seemed determined to maintain the facade, perhaps knowing she might not have another chance to conceive. To support her ruse, she started wearing loose clothing and eating more to create the appearance of being pregnant. Meanwhile, a troubling plan began to emerge in her mind. About 2 months after she lost the baby, news spread at the school about the pregnancy of a young teacher named Flavia, who received many congratulations. Until that point, Rosalba and Flavia were not close. They had rarely interacted. However, Rosalba shared several fabricated stories in order to gain sympathy. She added Flavia on social media and began messaging her every day, suggesting they go for walks or chat since their due dates were similar. Rosalba asserted that they would have much in common. Flavia was initially hesitant to have lunch with Rosalba because of her eccentric reputation, but she eventually agreed during a work break. They exchanged phone numbers, and Rosalba shared several fabricated stories to gain sympathy. The only true part of her stories was that she had struggled for years to conceive and had longed for this pregnancy. Of course, she did not mention the miscarriage. Initially, they met infrequently, despite seeing each other at work almost every day. It later emerged that Rosalba had also connected with 2 other expectant mothers from the same town on social media, who she believed were at a similar stage in their pregnancies. She attempted to build friendships with them by inviting them out and asking to visit their homes. Rosalba claimed she was having a daughter. However, when she discovered that both women she had met online were having boys, she abruptly cut off contact with them. Shortly after, she found out that Flavia was expecting a girl, and from that point on, Rosalba became completely fixated on her. As time went on, it became harder for Rosalba to keep up the pretense of being pregnant. She frequently searched online for symptoms and experiences that expectant mothers often report. She would share these with her husband, family, and co-workers as if they were her own. Over several months, she gained nearly 30 pounds, but her appearance still didn't fully resemble that of someone in the later stages of pregnancy. Her husband insisted on joining her for doctor's appointments. He wanted to see the baby on the ultrasound, but Rosalba had to come up with excuses to maintain the deception. Zomir was a trusting man who loved his wife and believed everything she said, which made it easier for her to keep him unaware of the truth. She would tell him that appointments had been canceled or rescheduled due to the clinic being overbooked or the doctor being unavailable. At times, she claimed she was lucky enough to get a last-minute appointment while he was at work, and he believed her every time. To strengthen her story, Rosalba began creating fake notes on her phone that appeared to be from her doctor, including recommendations, appointment confirmations, and cancellations. Although she didn't have a strong grasp of medical terminology, often made spelling and factual errors, Zomir wasn't familiar with medical details, so he had no reason to question her. To maintain the deception and avoid raising suspicion, Rosalba even sent messages to her husband pretending to be the doctor. In one message, she suggested that they temporarily pause their intimate relationship to minimize any risks to the pregnancy. He accepted this advice, believing it was from a medical expert. Rosalba developed an obsession with shopping for baby items such as onesies, diapers, bottles, pacifiers, blankets, and toys. She frequently visited stores with her husband, mother, or sister, but eventually, all her attention turned to Flavia. In July 2020, Rosalba organized an emotional maternity photo shoot. In the photos, she wore a flowing pregnancy gown and held tiny baby booties and a onesie while her husband lovingly embraced and kissed her belly, while she smiled sweetly for the camera. Everything appeared so genuine that no one suspected anything amiss. Those photos would later become part of the criminal case files. By early June 2020, Flavia and Rosalba were almost inseparable, spending time together every day, sharing thoughts, and planning for the future. However, it was always Rosalba who took the initiative. Flavia, being kind and empathetic, found it hard to say no. Whenever she tried to reschedule, Rosalba would play on Flavia's sympathy, claiming she was going through personal issues, needed someone to talk to, which worked every time. Rosalba was closely watching Flavia, asking her about her symptoms, doctor visits, and medical tests. She would then share those details with her own family and husband as if they were her own experiences. Rosalba imitated Flavia's walk, mannerisms, food cravings, and even how she held her back or moved awkwardly. Valdelli disapproved of his wife's new friendship and was upset about the time they spent together, which created tension in their marriage. They argued about it several times, but Flavia, being gentle and compassionate, couldn't bring herself to reject or ignore Rosalba. By mid-July, Rosalba had told people that she was due to deliver her baby, but she concocted another lie, claiming that the doctors had incorrectly calculated her due date. Meanwhile, she was secretly planning something disturbing, a scenario so dreadful. In August, Rosalba started planning a surprise celebration for Flavia to honor Flavia's upcoming baby. She chose decorations, invited guests, and set up a special photo area. Flavia, wanting to be polite, initially tried to decline the party. However, Rosalba became emotional, claiming she had put in a lot of effort and truly wanted to give Flavia a meaningful experience. Eventually, Flavia reluctantly agreed, unaware of the twists ahead. The celebration was scheduled for August 27, 2020. Rosalba managed all the details, promised to send the location and final arrangements to the guests. However, the day before the event, Rosalba contacted each guest and claimed the celebration had to be postponed due to unexpected issues. She assured them she would provide a new date and time soon. Her explanation was convincing, and no one questioned it, nor did anyone reach out to Flavia, who remained completely in the dark. On August 27th, at the originally planned time, Rosalba picked up Flavia, telling her they were going to the baby shower. Because it was meant to be a women-only event, Flavia's husband, Valdelli, stayed home. He walked his heavily pregnant wife to Rosalba's car, completely unaware this would be the last time he saw her. As they drove, Flavia was oblivious to their destination. Rosalba said it was a surprise, and a few minutes into the drive, she suggested Flavia wear a blindfold to keep it a secret. Flavia hesitated but eventually agreed, not sensing any danger. During the drive, Rosalba kept the conversation light to help Flavia feel relaxed and avoid raising any suspicions. They went to an abandoned ceramics warehouse in Canalinha's Galera neighborhood. After helping Flavia out of the car while she was still blindfolded, Rosalba guided her into one of the old buildings. The silence and strange smell likely made Flavia uneasy. When she reached up to take off the blindfold, Rosalba suddenly struck her head with a heavy brick. Rosalba hit she multiple times until she collapsed on the floor. In a final act of violence, Rosalba punched her in the face. It seemed Rosalba had wanted to hurt her as much as possible, despite once calling her a friend. Without checking if Flavia was still alive, Rosalba hurried to carry out the next phase of her horrific plan. She had brought a box cutter, some rags, and a blanket to the scene. With a steady hand, she began to cut into her friend, Flavia. Rosalba had no medical training, no understanding of anatomy, and no idea how a C-section was performed. Despite this, she started slicing into Flavia's abdomen with the box cutter, trying to retrieve the baby. She acted aggressively, using too much force and lacking precision. The box cutter, unlike a surgical instrument, tore through the skin rather than creating clean cuts. Rosalba had completely misunderstood the reality of what she was attempting. What she thought would be a quick procedure turned out to be chaotic and messy. The process took much longer than she expected, and her frustration grew, resulting in her accidentally cutting the baby several times while trying to pull her out. The environment was entirely unsanitary. Rosalba didn't even attempt to clean the tools she had brought. The fact that the baby survived the ordeal was nearly miraculous. After finally extracting the baby, she wrapped the newborn in the blanket and placed her in the back seat of her car. Rosalba then wiped her hands as best as she could, changed into clean clothes she had brought from home, and threw her blood-stained outfit into the trunk. She paused to rehearse her story before heading to the hospital. In her haste, Rosalba forgot to properly close the trunk of her car, and while waiting at a red light, it popped open enough to expose the bloodied clothing inside. Passengers in the car behind her noticed this and immediately called the police, providing a description of the vehicle and the direction it was heading. Minutes after Rosalba arrived at the hospital, officers intercepted her at the entrance as she carried a blood-soaked bundle in her arms. She told them it was her baby and that the newborn needed urgent medical attention. Officers escorted her to the emergency room while they waited nearby. With a trembling voice and tears in her eyes, Rosalba explained to the medical staff that she had gone into sudden labor and didn't have time to reach the hospital in advance. She said the baby had fallen onto gravel during her rush trip to the car, and in a panic, she had wrapped the baby in the first blanket she found before driving. When a doctor informed her that she needed to be examined, Rosalba refused, insisting she was fine. This raised immediate concerns among the staff. Upon examining the baby, the medical team found several unusual cuts and puncture wounds that did not appear to be from a fall on gravel. The injuries looked like they had been inflicted with a sharp object in a chaotic manner. Fortunately, none of the wounds affected vital organs, and the medical team quickly treated them to prevent infection. Concerns were immediately communicated to the police, who insisted that Rosalba undergo a physical examination. They warned her that if she refused, they would have to use legal authority. With no other option, Rosalba reluctantly agreed. The examination confirmed the doctor's suspicions. There were no signs of childbirth or pregnancy. There was no bleeding, no physical trauma, and no other indicators. Both internally and externally, everything looked normal, indicating that her entire account was fabricated. However, the doctors chose not to confront Rosalba immediately. Instead, they asked her to call her husband, Zomir, and request that he bring her personal documents since she only had her driver's license with her. They needed to investigate where the baby had come from and the source of the unusual wounds on the newborn. The condition of the baby suggested a delivery in an unsanitary setting, but the full extent of the horrifying crime had yet to be uncovered. Rosalba called Zomir, informing him that she was at the hospital and that their daughter had been born, but complications had arisen. She requested that he bring some paperwork and told him where to find it. Unfortunately, she made a major oversight. She forgot about a crucial piece of evidence. While gathering the documents, Zomir inadvertently picked up a medical record that belonged to someone else, specifically Flavia's file. She had taken the folder to review the test results and recommendations and later hidden it in her drawer with her own documents. When hospital staff noticed that the medical file belonged to a woman named Flavia Godinho, who was expecting a daughter in early September. They realized the baby seemed to be hers but was not with her. However, the pressing question remained, where was the real mother? The police immediately began to suspect Zomir could be involved. He was detained, questioned about how he had obtained someone else's medical file and where his wife had gotten the baby. Clearly confused and shaken, he claimed he had no idea what was happening. When informed that Rosalba had never been pregnant, he was visibly stunned. He then asserted that this was not true, stating he had cared for Rosalba throughout her pregnancy and even claimed to have felt the baby move. He presented photos from their maternity shoot and messages he believed were from the doctor monitoring her pregnancy. However, these messages turned out to be incriminating. They were filled with spelling errors and incorrect medical terminology. Authorities quickly discovered that the texts had come from Rosalba's own phone. After laying out all the facts, Zomir broke down in tears, covering his face with his hands. He had truly trusted his wife and was eagerly anticipating becoming a father. Meanwhile, Flavia's husband, Valdelli, had reported her missing. He informed the police that she had left with a friend to attend a baby shower, expecting to return by 9 p.m., but she never came back and her phone was off. Worried, Valdelli began calling other guests who were said to be invited to the party, only to find out in shock that the event had been cancelled the day before. As Valdelli continued to attempt to reach Rosalba, the friend who supposedly organized the gathering, his concern deepened when he discovered her phone was also turned off. Realizing he couldn't wait any longer, he went directly to the police. However, law enforcement had not yet received the hospital report regarding Rosalba and the newborn, so they were unaware that the cases might be linked. The officers said they would start searching in the morning, but that wasn't sufficient for Valdelli. He teamed up with Flavia's parents and other relatives to begin their own search. They divided into teams to cover more areas, and Valdelli decided to check the outskirts of town. It was there, while passing by an abandoned factory, that he chose to stop and investigate. Tragically, he found his wife's body, brutally disfigured. Shocked and terrified, he quickly called the police, unable to understand what had happened or who could commit such a horrific act. When the police arrived, they had already been informed by the hospital about Rosalba. This woman also possessed a medical file belonging to a woman named Flavia Godinho. The authorities realized that the name of the victim discovered at an abandoned factory matched the name on the stolen medical file, which clarified the case. Forensic evidence showed that the victim had been hit at least 5 times in the head with a brick, but these injuries were not fatal on their own. The cause of death was identified as severe blood loss due to a violent attempt to remove the baby. A box cutter used in the act was found near the body. With all the evidence pointing to Rosalba's guilt, it became a straightforward case. DNA testing confirmed that the baby Rosalba attempted to claim was indeed Flavia's daughter. Despite the strong evidence against her, Rosalba continued to deny her involvement and maintained her story. Her fingerprints were discovered on the knife beside Flavia's body. Flavia's blood was found on her clothes, shoes, and hair. Investigators confirmed that Rosalba had a miscarriage months earlier and had lied about still being pregnant. She had premeditated the crime, choosing her victim in advance to take the baby, without considering the consequences of her actions. Rosalba was convicted of aggravated homicide, infanticide, concealment of a corpse, obstruction of justice, kidnapping of a minor, and denial of rights to infants. In hopes of receiving a lighter sentence, she later recounted the events in detail, shocking everyone in the courtroom. Her attorney claimed that Rosalba had suffered a psychological breakdown after her miscarriage and became obsessed with motherhood, losing touch with reality. However, a psychological evaluation determined that she was mentally competent and fully accountable for her actions. She was sentenced to 57 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving at least half of her sentence. Zomir, Rosalba's husband, was completely exonerated. It was established that he had no knowledge of his wife's plans and had no part in the crime. Shortly after her arrest, he filed for divorce and moved away from São João Batista. Flavia's family also chose to leave the small town after the legal proceedings were finished. The case had become the most talked about topic in the community, and they wanted to protect young Cecilia, the name they chose for Flavia's daughter. The tragic murder of Flavia Doddenho Mafra stands as a chilling reminder of how far desperation and obsession can drive a person to commit unspeakable acts. The small, tight-knit community of São João Batista was forever changed by this brutal crime, which shattered their sense of safety and trust. Flavia, a beloved teacher and soon-to-be mother, was robbed of her life and dreams by someone she considered a friend, leaving her family and community to grapple with unimaginable grief. Rosalba Maria Grimes' calculated deception and heinous actions not only took a life but also exposed the depths of her fixation on fulfilling a fantasy at any cost. While justice was served with her conviction, the scars left on Flavia's loved ones and the town will endure. Cecilia, Flavia's daughter, survives as a symbol of hope amidst tragedy, raised by a family determined to honor her mother's memory. This case underscores the profound consequences of unchecked ambition and the devastating ripple effects of betrayal, serving as a somber lesson in the value of empathy, honesty, and the sanctity of human life. Danger can sometimes be much closer than we think. Today's story will tell you how even the most ordinary events can turn into a real nightmare for someone. Cheese in a mousetrap can be either free but, on the contrary, too expensive. In any case, before accepting such gifts of fate, you should be careful about who gives them and whether it will cost you your life. The city of New Orleans, Louisiana, USA, was full of dark stories, including slavery and torture. Despite the fact that we seem to live in a civilized world, echoes of horrific events are still heard in New Orleans, occasionally adding to the town's ominous reputation. Today's story took place in this mysterious place. Jaron Lockhart was born on February 28, 1989. She had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. The Lockharts were not happy. Their parents had no formal education, which made employment and earnings difficult. They constantly suffered from financial hardships and struggled even to feed their large household. From an early age, their children faced poverty. They could not afford anything. After nearly a decade of such a life, the family caught the attention of Child Protective Services. It seemed that this could help change their situation for the better, but in reality, the mother managed to retain her rights to her children. Unfortunately, life for their children did not improve. They continued to live in dire need. Naturally, the struggle for survival was unsatisfactory for them, but they had little choice. Against this backdrop, from a very early age, Jaron sought ways to start earning money. She was determined and wanted to take her salvation from the margins into her own hands. She succeeded. At the age of 18, she found a small apartment on the outskirts that she could afford while working part-time. Despite still being a teenager, Jaron began to solve adult problems. She got a job and started to provide for herself, managing this even better than her parents. While she still faced typical teenage challenges, she did not want to drop out of school. She aimed to earn her diploma, then go to college, obtain a higher education, and continue building a career. She was particularly interested in the beauty industry. Jaron's schedule was very busy, but she found time for her creative aspirations. She enjoyed drawing, poetry, and literature. She also wrote poems as a way of self-expression. This creativity helped her cope with the surrounding reality, and she was known for her bright personality. Jaron had a knack for emphasizing her style through clothing and makeup, especially in creating vibrant looks. By the age of 18, Jaron met a guy named Jeremy Foster. According to her, it was love at first sight. They began a relationship that developed over several years. Those who were well acquainted with them described them as a sincere couple with a promising future. They were very active, positive, and complemented each other well. When Jaron found out that she was pregnant and expecting a girl, she had already chosen the name Riley and Lockhart. She was thrilled at the chance to become a mother, having always dreamed of a large family. However, during this time, fears related to her past re-emerged. She worried that she wouldn't be able to provide for her child, create financial stability, or can't prevent her child from experiencing the same beggarly existence that she had known. Jaron was not accustomed to relying on others, so she didn't allow Jeremy to take care of all the financial matters. Memories of her difficult childhood weighed heavily on her, leading to constant tension. While pregnant, she resolved to secure a better future for herself and her child. Jaren planned to obtain her cosmetology diploma in 2012. She successfully completed the program and acquired a license to practice privately. Unfortunately, the niche was overcrowded, so breaking through to a noticeable level required hard work, but this did not scare her. At that time, she worked as a bartender at a nearby club, and in her free time, she started getting some beauty orders. As an employee of the establishment, she mainly relied on tips. However, this was not a stable enough source of income. When Jaren didn't earn enough, she usually had the option to make extra money by dancing at another club in the evenings. She frequently worked part-time as a dancer, a situation that persisted until the changes associated with her pregnancy became apparent. Finally, Riley was born, and Jaren's activities in cosmetology stalled. At first, it was difficult for her to devote time to her development. She had not a single free minute, everything was spent on Jeremy and Riley. During this period, Jaren wanted to find stability, even considered moving to a motel with her boyfriend and baby to reduce rent expenses and pay the bills. And quickly got herself back in shape to found herself at the pool again. In fact, she did not enjoy this activity but felt forced to do it to avoid financial problems, which still frightened her. Despite the negativity, dancing helped. She rarely faced difficulties. She could provide for herself and her child, paying for housing without needing help from her parents. She often had to dance at night. This repetitive cycle continued until June 6, 2012. It was a Wednesday. Jaren was getting ready for another extra job. Months earlier, she had been unable to pay the full rent, resulting in arrears. As fate would have it, she didn't have time to cover them before the next payment was due. After working a day at the bar, she decided to go dancing that evening. Jaren was preparing for work by 7 p.m., and her shift ended around 2 a.m. Usually, on such nights, she would return home quietly, go to bed so as not to wake Jeremy and her daughter. However, that day was different. On the morning of June 7th, when Jeremy woke up, he immediately noticed that his partner was not nearby. He began to worry, as this was unusual for Jaren. He tried to call her mobile phone but was alarmed to find it turned off. This increased his anxiety, prompting him to call all his friends, relatives, and acquaintances whose numbers he knew. He reached out for help. The men went together to the club where Jaren had been dancing the night before. However, due to club regulations, the administration was prohibited from disclosing information about their employees. This confidentiality, meant to protect the dancers, cruelly hindered the family from discovering whether she had been at work that night. Ultimately, they contacted the local sheriff's department. Unfortunately, the police response was sluggish, and active measures were only taken the next day. Even then, it was of little help, as no information about Jaren emerged in the following days. The police worked with a lack of enthusiasm, knowing that a striptease dancer had gone missing, which they equated to that of a call girl. It was difficult to convince them that she was a young mother and a decent woman. Around 5:30 p.m. on June 8, the children were walking on one of the beaches of the Gulf of Mexico, Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, during low tide. Part of the coast was exposed, and the teenagers spotted a suspicious object at the very edge of the water. When they approached and looked closer, they realized with horror that it was a human torso. The children ran away from the scene and informed the adults, who immediately called the police. Officers found part of a woman's body on the beach, leading to immediate difficulties with identification. However, tattoos and piercings were visible, which should have simplified the process. Unfortunately, at first, no connection was made between the discovered body and Jaren's disappearance. After several days of comparisons, law enforcement finally paid attention to Jaren's disappearance report. Her bright appearance stood out from the others. The tattoos found on the body matched the descriptions provided by Jaren's relatives, who affirmed that they resembled those Jaren had. Despite no documents being found nearby, the police began reviewing all reports of missing persons in the area. When they contacted the Lockhart family, the police took detailed descriptions of Jaren's piercings, tattoos, even small scars and birthmarks. However, due to the long stay in the water, the paint had faded and spread significantly, and this method did not provide a 100% probability of identification. It was decided to conduct DNA testing, which allowed for the identification of the victim as a close relative of the Lockhart family. In the following days, several items of clothing washed up on the coast that relatives recognized as belonging to Jaron. Now, there were questions about the classification of the incident and efforts to establish the exact cause of death. Due to the absence of all body parts, this task proved to be impossible. The forensic expert analyzed the available remains and assumed that the girl died because of a deep cut on her chest, which resembled a knife wound. At the same time, the circumstances of her death remained unclear. One theory proposed that she could have drowned and then ended up under the propellers of a ship passing by. Overall, the police persistently tried to connect the death with water and classify it as an accident to quickly close the case. Fortunately, pressure from relatives prevented the investigation from being stalled. To fully state the cause of death and the circumstances surrounding it, it was necessary to find all body parts. Later, 2 legs and the head were found on the coast. Presumably, the body had been dismembered to make identification difficult. This opinion was confirmed after investigators discovered that areas of skin on the body, where tattoos had also been removed. The forensic expert was unable to find any foreign DNA samples. All traces of the crime had naturally been washed away by the water. A toxicological examination showed the presence of a small amount of alcohol in the blood. However, the concentration was insufficient to cause her death. That's where the information ended. No matter how thoroughly they searched the coast, no other remains could be found. Law enforcement officers continued the investigation in hopes of obtaining more information and finally decided to reconstruct the last day of Jaron's life. They focused on the evening when she went to the club for her next work shift. Her relatives provided a detailed account of her movements up until she left for work. They reported that what happened afterward remained a mystery, as the club administration refused to provide any information regarding Jaron. It was unclear whether she had even shown up that night. When the police arrived at the club, they were met with the same cold reception as the Lockhart family, possibly even worse, because such establishments traditionally do not welcome the attention of the authorities. This could significantly complicate their task. However, at the request of the police and with a warrant in hand, the administration eventually provided information as well as access to video surveillance recordings. It was determined that Jaron did indeed arrive for her shift at around 7 p.m. and, as usual, she worked the evening without any incidents, leaving at approximately 2 a.m. There was nothing unusual in her behavior, except for one small detail. That night, she left the club not alone. The video revealed that Jaron was accompanied by a young athletic man and a woman. When the police contacted the club employees and administration again, no one could definitively identify the individuals seen in the video surveillance recording, or perhaps they simply didn't know them. The dancers also failed to provide any valuable information. In fact, some refused to talk to the police over the weekend, leaving the possibility for further assistance open. The police had no choice but to print out photographs of the individuals who accompanied Jaron. These 2 were probably the last ones to see her alive and might have known something or been involved in her death. Unfortunately, the photos did not clearly show the faces of the individuals. However, they did give an idea of what the probable criminals were wearing. It was also possible to note what Jaron had with them, which provided valuable clues. Still, the lack of names and an approximate direction for the search was complicated by the fact that, similar to other cases, a gang of killers specializing in strippers was operating in the city. Some dancers were even afraid to go to work. Detectives continued to question the girls in the hope that at least someone would recognize the couple in the photo. Investigators decided to take advantage of the excitement among the strippers to encourage them to talk, but they genuinely had no information. Finally, on one day, detectives met with one of the dancers who had also worked at the club on the night of Jaron's disappearance. She remembered the couple from the photo, as both had approached her that evening. The young man offered her the opportunity to take part in a private party being organized at a house outside the city for a tidy sum. He said that there would be a bachelor party at a friend's house and that they needed a dancer for the whole evening. It sounded legitimate. People often approached the club with similar offers. However, this time, everyone they approached rejected the offers for work, particularly since they were offering a substantial amount of money, which was unusual even for a whole night of dancing. Of course, the club employees assumed that they wanted something more than just dancing on the pool, but the couple rejected these assumptions. Regardless, none of the dancers agreed to take the offer. Despite the detailed description and additional information, none of the girls had more precise data to identify the suspicious couple. The investigation was at a standstill. Finally, another girl, also a club worker, went to the police station and identified the individuals in the photo as 40-year-old Terry Speaks and his 28-year-old wife, Margaret Sanchez. The police immediately found their addresses and detained them. While the suspects spoke to the investigators, the police began questioning their neighbors. The man living across the street provided valuable clues to the investigation. He reported that the morning after Jaren's disappearance, he had seen Terry leaving the house with several large black bags. The witness noted that it was obvious Terry was struggling, despite being a strong man. He refused the neighbor's offer of help, but that was not what alarmed the neighbor. He noted that the bags had a suspicious smell. As Terry walked past, a strong odor of cleaning products hit his nose, which seemed alarming. When asked what was in the bags, Terry rudely refused to explain and continued loading them into his car. Detectives quickly discovered that Margaret was a rather strange woman with specific aesthetic tastes. She dressed extravagantly, which seemed unusual. She was attractive, athletic, yet her behavior did not align with her appearance. While communicating, she seemed somewhat socially awkward and often avoided contact with others. Sometimes, she would even shy away from someone who simply said hello or wished her a good day. When acquaintances of they were asked about Terry, they provided even more alarming information, with most considering him to be genuinely dangerous due to his past outbursts of aggression. Immediately, locals informed the police that they had heard Terry was wanted for indecent liberties. This information seemed odd because, although several people knew about it, no one had contacted the police to report him. When Terry was checked in the database, it turned out he was indeed wanted in North Carolina for a series of violent crimes, the most serious of which involved the assault of a minor. He argued in court that it was consensual but claimed the victim later changed her story out of spite. The victim insisted that Terry had threatened to kill her if she resisted. In the end, he received a short sentence for assault but was quickly released. Now, he was on probation, which he repeatedly violated, prompting him to flee to another state to avoid incarceration. While analyzing the personalities of Terry and Margaret, the police learned that Margaret worked as a dancer in several clubs, including the one where Jaren worked. On June 6th, both Jaren and Margaret were scheduled for the night shift, and her husband came in as a client. Terry and Margaret had been inseparable since they met in 2009. As it turned out, she and Jaren occasionally crossed paths at the club, eventually becoming colleagues and friends. At that point, the police aimed to investigate whether Margaret could lure Jaren into a trap. The most valuable clue the police had at that time was information about Terry's car, in which he loaded the suspicious bags before driving away. The police were able to track his movements using video cameras and managed to record him at several locations around the city. They identified several spots where Terry disposed of suspicious bags, leading them to conclude that he was likely scattering the remains of his victim to make it harder to find her. This premise was the most plausible assumption made by the investigators. This information was sufficient to detain both suspects until the circumstances were clarified, and they were held in custody since Terry posed a high flight risk. Unfortunately, their arrest was not enough to prompt the suspects to talk. They stubbornly remained silent. However, the police had another trump card, a warrant to search their home. Margaret and Terry were detained fairly quickly, generating hope that they couldn't manage to destroy the evidence. This was crucial since all the evidence detectives currently had was circumstantial. Fortunately, a real jackpot awaited the police at Terry and Margaret's house. There were hundreds of emails on their computers, in which they discussed in detail the events of that fateful night. It all started with a discussion of the murder and ended with the spouses literally threatening each other, apparently both afraid and mistrustful of one another, fearing that the other would set them up. Ultimately, it was this correspondence that implicated them the most. The detectives decided to employ a trick. They wanted to show Margaret and Terry's letters separately, without revealing that everything had already been read, as if they were looking at the phones for the first time. It was worth opening the messenger in front of Terry and Margaret, as they began to accuse each other. This was the main goal of the police. The investigators executed this trick well, and it was evident that the primary suspects were indeed detained correctly. However, the situation changed little as it was impossible to obtain a confession. Margaret and Terry simply shifted responsibility onto one another, leaving the motive for the massacre unclear. Nonetheless, it was likely an abuse assault since Terry and Margaret initially wanted to convince several other girls to join them at a mansion outside the city, indicating that the specific victim may not have been important to them. This hints at the fact that the $1,000 offered for the bachelor party could have resolved urgent financial issues that Jaren was desperately trying to address. Probably, this was a decisive factor in agreeing to go to the party. Additionally, Margaret could have persuaded Jaren, as she was someone Jaren trusted. When Jaren ended up in Terry's house, it seems he wanted more than just a dance. A conflict arose between them that led to death. Continuing to investigate the flow of information, the police confirmed that no bachelor party. This was an obvious lie. Judging by the correspondence of Margaret and Terry, this attack had been planned for several months. It turned out that at the end of May, they began plotting a bloody massacre and even visited the locations where Terry later disposed of the bags containing remains. They scouted the area, taking pictures that were later deleted. Nevertheless, the police managed to restore and reveal the bloody plan of this deranged couple. Direct evidence of Margaret's involvement in the murder was not found within the house. However, a metal container was discovered in which something had obviously been burned recently. The police examined the area but were unable to recover the contents, as the investigation believed the criminals had disposed of some evidence and simply did not have time to get rid of the rest. However, even the correspondence was enough for the jury, as the few messages very eloquently described what had happened. In 2015, Terry was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for premeditated murder, concealing evidence of a crime, and desecrating remains. The situation with his wife turned out to be more complicated. However, a decision was made that resulted in Margaret Sanchez receiving a 40-year sentence for obstruction of justice and another 40 years for manslaughter. The sentences would be served consecutively, amounting to 80 years. Margaret and Terry never confessed during the trial. They showed no remorse or regret. Margaret refused to provide any comments to justify her actions or explain her motives. Consequently, it was not possible to accurately reconstruct the chronology of events. In narrow circles of popular theories, there were rumors about Margaret and Terry's involvement in the occult, their planning of ritual murders in a satanic style. They allegedly planned to kill several girls. Fortunately, they were stopped and can no longer harm anyone. In 2016, 22-year-old Julia Enright was studying at the Massachusetts Medical College in the USA. At that time, she met a young man named Brandon Chicklese, who was 18. Brandon was a technology student, fulfilling his dream of becoming a heating and ventilation technician. Julia and Brandon were completely different from each other. Julia dressed and behaved as differently as possible, whereas Brandon dressed modestly and was kind and calm. Brandon grew up surrounded and cared for by his parents. He had been a Boy Scout for over 10 years, was described by those who knew him well as responsive and open. When he and Julia started dating, their union seemed like a real attraction of opposites. Gradually, they began an intimate relationship, and Julia involved Brandon in unusual forms of intimacy. Given their age, it was not easy to find privacy for such experiments, so Julia suggested using a treehouse owned by one of her friends. The house was abandoned and located in a wooded area just a few kilometers away from the suburban homes where Julia was born and raised. Over time, the owner stopped visiting the secluded place, and Julia began to use the house freely. She decorated her improvised shelter with chains and other paraphernalia, turning it into a base for their experiments. Her collection of unique objects began to form there. By the time Brandon first visited this place, an eerie atmosphere pervaded it, inspiring dark thoughts. However, he tolerated the oddities of his girlfriend, and they regularly met there. But as their relationship developed, Brandon increasingly felt that they were not right for each other. Eventually, he realized that further development of their relationship was impossible. Brandon suggested breaking up and remaining friends. Julia agreed. It seemed that both of them calmly separated, demonstrating emotional maturity. In 2018, Brandon lived with his parents in the small town of Ringe, New Hampshire. He had obtained the qualification for which he had studied and worked so long, becoming a heating engineer. He started dating another girl and was preparing to celebrate his birthday in July. It seemed that, despite his young age, he had managed to achieve something significant. He had an education, a stable job, and a relationship with a girl. He sincerely told his family that he felt happier than ever. Shortly before this period, Brandon thought he had gained the necessary experience and was ready to open his own business in heating systems. He began to take action, and everyone gave him great support for this initiative. Relatives, friends, and his girlfriend all recognized that Brandon was just the type of person who could successfully run his own business. Unfortunately, it was not destined for him to realize these dreams. On June 23, 2018, Brandon left home to visit relatives in Windham, New Hampshire. For this, he had to travel about 80 kilometers, just over an hour's journey. He left home at around 1 p.m., but he did not return to his relatives by evening. Any attempts to contact him were ignored. His family, girlfriend, and grandmother were understandably panicking. This behavior was completely uncharacteristic of Brandon. His mobile phone was turned off, a situation he had never experienced before, as he had a busy schedule and could receive calls from new clients at any moment. Unfortunately, in order to contact the authorities to report a missing person, they had to wait at least a day. On the morning of June 24th, Brandon's parents went to the police station. They presented their arguments in detail and were very worried because Brandon was not prone to spontaneous parties or meetings with friends, did not suffer from any mental problems. Generally should not have disappeared anywhere. Law enforcement began to search for traces of Brandon in Windham. However, despite their efforts, they could find no evidence that he had even reached the city. There were no traces of his car, including on recordings from CCTV cameras. Brandon did not buy anything in Windham, did not pay for gas with his card, and did not use his phone. In this state of having no leads, 5 days passed. Family members searched for him, but increasingly, the thought that they would not see their loved one again haunted them. Finally, on June 29th, a gray Honda Civic was found in the parking lot of the Hannaford supermarket on Route 202 in Ringe, New Hampshire. It was Brandon's car. It was unclear how the car appeared there, especially since it was unlocked and the keys were left in the ignition. This only strengthened the suspicion that something terrible had occurred. Brandon would never have treated his property this way. Such methods are often used by criminals to provoke the theft of a vehicle, leaving fingerprints behind to set up innocent people. During this time, relatives continued their search, distributing, pasting flyers throughout Brandon's hometown and the surrounding area. Unfortunately, all these efforts were in vain. On July 10, 2018, a random runner training in a forested area in Ringe made a horrifying discovery just 10 kilometers from the shopping center where Brandon's car was found. He located a human body, which was hidden in the bushes only tens of meters from the side of the highway. The remains of the young man were wrapped in tarpaulin, and his hands and feet were bound with tape. Given the condition of the body at the time of discovery, most of the flesh had rotted away, exposing the bones. When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, they immediately stated that this method of hiding the body was not chosen by chance. In fact, such extensive decomposition is an extremely effective way to get rid of evidence in the shortest possible time. Autopsy results showed the victim was Brandon Chicklese. It was believed that the detectives were dealing with a fairly experienced killer who knew how to evade justice. The perpetrator probably carefully studied related materials, and perhaps this was not his first crime. Suspicion only increased when investigators managed to find the shirt that Brandon had been wearing. It had several distinct cuts, apparently from a knife. Judging by this item of clothing, the victim had been stabbed 12 times. Unfortunately, the forensic expert could not confirm all of these wounds due to the body's condition. Perhaps they were more due to the high degree of decomposition. Thus, the expert could only speak with certainty about the traces left on the bones. For the same reason, it was not possible to establish the exact cause of death. It was possible that Brandon was tortured, but proving or disproving such guesses turned out to be impossible. No matter how hard the investigators tried, they were unable to find his mobile phone. It was apparently destroyed or discarded. Since the moment of Brandon's disappearance, they could not connect to his means of communication. This only confirmed the idea that the crime was committed by an experienced killer who knew that any information carriers and means of communication were compromising. This strategy was effective, as the police could not even establish the route Brandon had taken before his death or after the murder. Fortunately, the detectives still had access to the list of calls from Brandon's mobile phone before it was turned off. When they received this information from the operator, they discovered that the last call before his disappearance and the switching off of his mobile phone was made near the home of his ex-girlfriend, Julia. Investigators assumed he could have visited her before leaving. As soon as the patrol officers arrived near Julia's house, they immediately suspected something was wrong. There was an unbearable smell of rotting flesh. Even more shocking discoveries awaited within the house. Officers found decomposing bodies of animals literally everywhere in the rooms. Outside, they were wrapped in tarpaulin, and inside, in various containers, there were BDSM kits, specific paraphernalia, knives, and related photos. In fact, this house became the most horrifying location in the memory of all the participants of the first encounter with Julia. Julia lived alone in her father's house. She worked as a phlebotomist in a clinical laboratory, dealing with blood, collecting it for analysis, and preparing samples. Given the respect that doctors receive in the USA, it was a rather esteemed profession. Julia was always a peculiar person. As it turned out, these quirks went far beyond the bounds of normalcy. Her work was not just a way for her to help people and earn a living, it became something much more. During the day, she worked as a phlebotomist, but at night, she turned into another person. She became quite famous in the escort industry, acting as a mistress. Her friends and acquaintances knew of Julia's BDSM fetish, which she openly discussed. She claimed that only willing participants were involved in her activities, insisting that it was a form of entertainment and that all clients left satisfied. However, none of her acquaintances suspected the dangers involved. Despite her fears and risks, she decided to take a big step, even posting an ad on a specialized website inviting everyone to engage in play involving knives and blood. According to the description, it was supposed to be BDSM domination, which involved lightly injuring the client and allowing them to bleed. This was a specific category of entertainment. There would always be clients willing to participate. Moreover, no one should care about what happens in someone else's bed if it is done by mutual consent. However, such activities always suspiciously resemble a front to cover up darker deeds or even a trap for naive partners. As it turned out, Julia had her own skeletons in the closet. She didn't just associate her life with blood, it was more akin to an obsession. In fact, she had a fascination not only with blood but also with dead flesh. She had a real collection of dead animals displayed in jars, among them large specimens like ravens. Additionally, almost constantly in her courtyard lay decomposing animal bodies, which she wrapped in tarpaulin to speed up decomposition from the heat and then used their bones for her artistic compositions. Despite the nightmarish aspects and especially the terrible smell, Julia perceived some sort of beauty in this and embodied it through her art. Unfortunately, her vision of beauty proved too perverse and cruel to earn her a place among artists. Moreover, Julia had a whole collection of vials filled with blood and used condoms. She was obsessed with serial killers. She once even described a kind of ritual in which she personally participated. When a whole group of people gathered, they acted out scenes with vampires and actually drank some of each other's blood. Despite these suspicious hobbies, Julia had friends and willingly demonstrated her creativity. She always claimed that she had no talent in art, but in this way, she expressed her vision of the world. In fact, time and time again, Julia showed her friends the remains of animals, which were laid out in specific patterns. Of course, most people were concerned about where she got all these bodies. To such questions, Julia always answered briefly that everything necessary for this so-called art was found in the forest or on the side of the road. Julia insisted that she did not harm living beings but found and used the bodies of dead animals. Considering that in everyday life she was very quiet and avoided conflicts, people believed that this was just an oddity. Apparently, Julia's inner circle didn't know about Jeffrey Dahmer. This infamous man once started with a similar fixation. He also collected dead animals and became obsessed with the study of remains. He described his passion as an alternative vision of the world or creativity. Like Julia, Dahmer surrounded himself with things of a frankly creepy nature, and naturally, this could not end well. Julia kept a detailed diary in which she described her life and her activities exploring her own psyche. It seemed she was not fully aware that her hobbies looked strange and provocative. She continued to view them as creative pursuits and spoke somewhat arrogantly about people who did not understand art and beauty. However, there were less philosophical notes in the diary. She described bloodthirstiness as a charming character trait and revealed her unhealthy attitude toward death. From the very first entry, she constantly talked about her obsessive desire to kill a person. Julia considered it the height of bloodthirstiness, a manifestation of insatiability, which excited and attracted her. Julia repeatedly mentioned that she was driven to this monstrous act by a certain hunger that arose with every thought of killing a person. All this frightening data was obtained during the investigation. The longer the police dug to understand who Julia was, the more shocked they became. For the detectives, it became obvious that they had encountered a potential serial killer. The biggest source of incriminating data was her mobile phone, which was taken for examination. As it turned out, shortly before Brandon's disappearance, Julia had met a new boyfriend named Jonathan Lind. They were both rather dark personalities, making them perfectly suited for each other. The night before Brandon's disappearance, immediately after the incident, Julia sent Jonathan a message containing the alarming phrase, "bloodbath." Detectives immediately noted that the treatment of Brandon's body was identical to the method Julia had used to accelerate the decomposition of animal remains. Even more unusual was the message sent to Brandon the day before his disappearance, in which Julia asked if he would come to visit her treehouse. The investigation established that a few weeks before her death, Julia was actively trying to improve her relationship with her ex since there were difficulties with the current girlfriend of Brandon. In fact, they were on the verge of breaking up due to her betrayal. Probably as a result of this, Julia managed to draw him in. In the end, he agreed to meet her at a kind of BDSM club, perhaps thinking of this visit to his ex as an act of reconciliation. Immediately after Brandon agreed to Julia's invitation, she wrote to her new boyfriend Jonathan that there was a surprise for him. By communicating with the neighbors of Julia, the police easily uncovered details of her intimate relationships and preferences. She openly shared this information with the entire neighborhood and seemed to even speak with pride about her activities in the intimate sphere. Gradually, the detectives came into possession of a business card on which she suggested playing with a knife and blood. There were witnesses who testified that Julia and her new boyfriend liked to cut each other during intimate. However, she herself would discuss it openly without the slightest embarrassment. When she ended up at the station for questioning, she laid out all the details. Surprisingly, after this conversation with Julia, the police officers let her go. She managed to convince them that despite her oddities, she was not involved in the murders and that there was no concrete evidence against her. According to Julia's confession, she truly intended to meet Brandon on that fateful day, but he never showed up. She sent him a message in the evening, but the guy never responded. Finally, one of the police officers decided to verify the information and found other messages from Brandon that Julia had not mentioned. Those messages made it clear that the former lovers had indeed met. This fleeting lie raised suspicions that the detectives had encountered a manipulative individual who needed to be further investigated. These guesses turned out to be correct. The more the police talked to Julia, the more she changed her story. Eventually, she admitted that she did meet with Brandon that evening. According to her, after a short conversation, he left to buy banned substances for the night, but the guy never returned and did not answer her calls, so she just went home. This also turned out to be a lie, as the guy did not use banned substances. After the lie was revealed, the detective spoke to the neighbors of Julia again, and they found out about the treehouse in the woods that Julia had turned into a BDSM headquarters. The officers focused on finding this hideout and managed to arrive there with her new boyfriend. It was obvious that the house had been thoroughly cleaned. There was even new furniture and a new carpet. Everything looked suspicious, as if someone had tried to cover up evidence of a crime. The carpet attracted the most attention. It looked out of place in this treehouse, as did the cleanliness, especially in sharp contrast to the chains and jars of blood and animal bodies. As soon as the carpet was lifted, it became evident that it was covering very large, washed-out blood stains. Similar traces were found under the floorboards. Blood also was on the steps and tree trunks. They had obviously tried to wash it off, but in vain, so they simply covered it with a carpet. It resembled a bloodbath. Judging by the number and size of these marks, it was clear that they were related to a deceased victim. Julia insisted that all these traces belonged to dead animals she had collected on the street. After searching the car, blood was also found there. Julia denied that Brandon was ever in the car or that they met in the treehouse on the day of the disappearance. However, DNA testing showed that she was lying, as most of the traces belonged to Brandon. As soon as the detectives presented this evidence, she changed her story again. Julia claimed that after her meeting with Brandon, they got very drunk. He went to get banned substances, and then they met in the treehouse. According to her confession, her ex-boyfriend attacked her, demanding intimate, but Julia resisted, justifying herself by saying that she had a new boyfriend. However, this did not help, as Brandon attacked and tried to abuse her. According to her, at that moment, she had no choice. Julia managed to reach for a knife, which she always carried on her belt. She claimed to have stabbed Brandon several times in self-defense. Afterward, Julia, in a state of shock, admitted that she could not even move from the spot, so she remained beside the wounded Brandon for about 40 minutes. During this time, he simply bled out. Julia did not call for help or contact the police. Instead, she turned to her boyfriend to ask for assistance in getting rid of the body. She did not want to go to jail for self-defense, believing that they would not believe her. By this point, investigators no longer believed a word she said. Additionally, the more than a dozen blows found only on the shirt were too much for self-defense. Her story about needing help from her new boyfriend was questionable, as he was known to be a sadist. It is unlikely that he was brought in solely to assist with getting rid of the body. Most likely, he also participated in the crime. However, no solid evidence was found. Julia ended her story by explaining how the body was wrapped in a tarpaulin and discarded off the highway. She insisted that the fabric was used only to disguise the remains. The police were convinced that she could have deliberately used a proven method to conceal human bones to fulfill her morbid fantasies. After all, maniacs are often prone to collecting items that remind them of their crimes. Julia's behavior did not resemble self-defense but clearly indicated an attempt to escape justice. Julia and Jonathan not only disposed of the body but also destroyed Brandon's mobile phone, attempted to eliminate traces of blood in the treehouse. They covered for each other when communicating with the authorities. There were no signs of struggle on Julia, and she was not morally traumatized by the events. Immediately after they disposed of the body, she and Jonathan simply went out for sushi. The detectives were finally able to confirm their suspicions after reviewing Julia's diaries. Judging by the last entries, she perceived Brandon's murder as a kind of gift for her new lover, who shared her peculiarities. Jonathan actively denied his involvement, insisting that he did not report the incident to law enforcement because Julia was scared and convinced him not to do so. She was absolutely certain that she would avoid punishment, as expressed in her diary in a rather crude manner. Additionally, Julia wrote that the torture and murder gave her body pleasure. It is evident that she would not have stopped there. In fact, each subsequent entry in the diary was more alarming than the last. The notes fully revealed the true nature of her interests. Julia repeatedly robbed graves and brought bones to add to her disturbing collection, which her boyfriend seemed not to be bothered by at all. In the first trial, Julia was charged with first-degree murder, and despite the overwhelming amount of evidence against her, she continued to insist that she was the victim of abuse. After her arrest, Jonathan, who was detained 2 weeks later, was charged with concealing evidence of a crime and perjury. He also did not admit guilt. Both were imprisoned and denied bail while awaiting trial. Julia's first trial was scheduled for November 2021. The prosecution insisted that the defendant planned Brandon Chickley's murder as an act of togetherness and a way to fulfill her vicious desires. Julia easily managed to lure him into a trap by promising intimate. Presumably, she brutally dealt with Brandon, then enlisted her new boyfriend to help get rid of the body and the traces of torture. Julia's deviant interests exceeded all reasonable limits. Shortly before Brandon's murder, she went to a family planning clinic to have an abortion. The staff confirmed that she persistently requested to keep the fetus, even attempting to bribe the doctors to allow her to take the unborn child home. It is obvious that the fetus would have become another exhibit in her collection. Of course, the lawyer tried his best to whitewash the image of the defendant and her accomplice. However, considering all the accumulated evidence, this proved to be quite difficult. Their only tactic was to smear the name of Brandon. The defense attorney tried to argue that Brandon was an abuse and a cruel, aggressive person, but all of this sounded extremely unconvincing. When Julia spoke at the trial, she cried while recounting how she was attacked by Brandon. She claimed that she managed to defend her honor only after she stabbed him in the throat, but she could not explain why she inflicted many other wounds. Despite the desperate attempts of the lawyer to defend her, the prosecution successfully painted a truly horrific image of Julia. The jury was adamant and found Julia Enright guilty, not of first-degree murder, but of second-degree murder, considering it an unintentional crime. In March 2022, the court announced the sentence of life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Upon hearing this decision, Julia burst into tears again, tearfully expressing that not a day goes by that she does not regret meeting Brandon. Julia never admitted guilt, calling the outcome of the trial a misunderstanding. Jonathan Lind, found guilty of giving false testimony, was sentenced to imprisonment for a term of 7 to 9 years. Brenda Michaela Gordillo was born on May 16, 1995, in Catamarca, Argentina. She is the only girl in a family of 3 children, with 2 older brothers, Yvonne and Federico. She also shared an especially close bond with her mother, Florin. She was a bright, organized, and responsible student, known for her friendly personality and ability to mediate conflicts. This aptitude eventually inspired her to pursue a career in psychology. As a child, Brenda participated in activities such as gymnastics, dancing, and acting in school plays, thoroughly enjoying her time on stage. She built many friendships and was well-liked for her helpful advice and understanding. After high school, she was accepted into a prestigious university in Buenos Aires, where she studied psychology with a specialization in negotiation and conflict resolution. A standout student, she consistently earned praise from her professors, who envisioned a bright future for her. She had plans to stay in the capital and build her career there. However, her life took an unexpected turn. During her second-to-last year of college, Brenda received heartbreaking news. Her father had passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The loss deeply affected her family, particularly her mother, who was left alone in their family home. By that time, Brenda's brothers had moved out and started their own families, while she remained in Buenos Aires, completing her degree. After graduating, Brenda returned to Catamarca to live with and support her mother. She found a job and decided to further her education by enrolling in law school at a local university. Returning to student life, she formed new friendships, one of which was with a young man named Naim Vera. Naim was born on June 11, 1999 in Catamarca, into a prestigious and wealthy family with a tradition of practicing medicine. His father was a renowned cardiac surgeon, and his mother ran a private pediatric practice. As the younger of 2 sons, Naim grew up alongside his brother Jamie, who was his complete opposite. While their parents provided the best possible opportunities for both, Jamie was hardworking and aspired to follow the family tradition by becoming a doctor. Naim, on the other hand, was far more relaxed, self-indulgent, and entitled. Naim impresses with his handsome appearance, modern fashion style, exuding confidence and receiving much love. Many girls at school admired him, and he thrived on the attention. However, in his final years of high school, he began using banned substances and often got into trouble. Thanks to his family's influence, he always avoided serious consequences. Over time, Naeem developed a reputation for being arrogant and confrontational. He was a bully, quarrelsome, and prone to violent outbursts. Despite his privileged upbringing, his volatile nature often overshadowed his advantages. In 2018, after graduating from high school, Naeem decided to turn his life around. He left behind his reckless behavior, sought treatment for his substance issues, and later gained acceptance into law school. It was during this new chapter of his life that he met Brenda. He was immediately captivated by her, and she was equally drawn to his confidence and bold demeanor. At the time, Brenda was 23, while Naeem had just turned 19. The age difference did not bother her, and she embraced his attention. When Brenda and Naeem first met, they spent hours talking at a bar. Later that night, they went to an apartment owned by Naeem's parents, to which he had access. That evening marked the beginning of their intimate relationship, and from then on, they began seeing each other frequently. For the first time, Brenda experienced what she believed to be true love and radiated happiness. Her friends and family noticed this transformation, often commenting on how joyful she had become. However, none of them had ever met Naeem, about whom Brenda talked a lot. Although she frequently mentioned Naeem, she only shared his photos from social media with her mother and brothers, casually hinting that he was her future fiancé. Over time, it became obvious that Naeem had no plans to introduce Brenda to his family or friends. Their relationship remained confined to the same apartment, and they never appeared in public together as a couple. Brenda thought it was unusual but convinced herself that Naeem just needed more time. Privately, she also worried that their age difference made him hesitant. The secret meetings lasted for many months, and she still invested a lot of emotions in this relationship. Even when Naeem began to grow distant, she chose to ignore the change in his behavior, clinging to the belief that their connection was still strong. One day, Brenda received a call from an unfamiliar number. The caller identifies himself as Naeem's cousin and gives her a dire warning. He claimed that Naeem had a violent past and that, if not for the protection of his parents, Naeem would have already faced significant legal trouble for his actions. The caller advises her to end the relationship immediately before things get worse. However, she ignores his advice. In mid-February 2019, Brenda found out she was pregnant. The news took her by surprise, but after the initial shock, she felt genuinely happy. She sees this as an opportunity to improve her relationship with Naeem, hoping that this will make him more serious and willing to commit to her. When they met again, Brenda shared the news. At first, Naeem was silent, but his reaction quickly shifted to anger. He stated that he wasn't ready to become a father and insisted that having a child didn't align with his current plans. He urged Brenda to terminate the pregnancy, promising to cover all expenses. Brenda firmly refused, explaining that she had health issues and that being able to conceive was nothing short of a miracle. Their disagreement escalated, and Naeem ended the relationship, saying it was best for them to separate. For a time, they stopped seeing each other but continued exchanging messages on social media. During this period, Brenda confided in a close friend, admitting how much she missed him and expressing hope for reconciliation. She revealed that she had never loved anyone as deeply as she loved Naeem. Towards the end of February, Naeem called Brenda and proposed they meet to have a calm discussion. Brenda was thrilled, convinced that he had reconsidered. She excitedly shared the news with her best friend, who encouraged her and reassured her that everything would work out. They planned to meet on the night of February 28, 2019. That night, she was invited to a classmate's birthday party. After the party, she went to Naeem's apartment and never left again. The following day, Friday, March 1st, Brenda did not attend her university classes, which was highly out of character for her. She had never missed a lecture without a valid reason, and now no one could contact her or determine her whereabouts. Brenda's mother remembered her mentioning the birthday party and saying in advance that she wouldn't be home that night. However, she did not specify whether she would be with friends or her boyfriend. She had planned to go directly to class in the morning, so her mother wasn't initially concerned. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when the university contacted Brenda's family to ask about her absence, that her mother realized something was wrong. Friends and relatives quickly began searching for her. Everyone knew that she wouldn't just vanish without informing someone. At first, there was still hope. Perhaps she was simply spending time with Naeem and had lost track of time. But as relatives began calling around for information, something shocking occurred that changed everything. In that moment, all hope was lost. Brenda was gone forever. At this time, Naeem entered the Catamarca police station, accompanied by his father and 2 attorneys. He stated that he wished to confess to a tragic incident that had occurred the previous night. He was taken to an interrogation room, where he calmly recounted his version of the events. Although visibly distressed, he remained composed and spoke confidently. Naeem explained that he had arranged for a female acquaintance, Brenda, to visit his apartment that evening for an intimate encounter. He mentioned that they had met in this way before, without any commitments or expectations. However, that night, an argument broke out between them, leading Naeem to demand that she leave immediately. The apartment consisted of 2 levels connected by a staircase, and Naeem claimed that during the confrontation, Brenda stepped backward, lost her balance, and fell down the stairs. He stated that he tried to catch her but failed. When he reached her, she was unresponsive. He said he attempted to help her, but it was too late. She had sustained a fatal neck injury from the fall. Panicked and fearing he would be blamed, Naeem made a rash decision to dispose of the body. He dragged Brenda to the terrace, where a large outdoor grill was located. Finding lighter fluid in a cabinet, he poured it over her body and lit a match. The fire ignited immediately, but the flames grew uncontrollably high, producing thick smoke. At this point, a neighbor from a nearby apartment noticed the activity and saw someone grilling late at night. When Naeem saw the neighbor, he waved and smiled, appearing calm and friendly. Later, the neighbor testified in court that Naeem's demeanor seemed normal, so he didn't report anything suspicious. Realizing that the grill couldn't be used to completely destroy the remains, Naeem abandoned the idea and brought the body back inside. He then packed the remains into garbage bags, placed them in boxes, and loaded them into his car. Driving aimlessly, he decided to discard the lower half in a random dumpster he passed. For the upper half, he drove out of the city to a shallow ravine near the roadway. He threw the remains into the ditch, covering them with dirt, branches, and trash. As he headed back to his car, a passing patrol unit stopped to check why his car was parked by the roadside. Thinking quickly, Naeem lied, saying that his girlfriend had called him and he had pulled over to talk. The officers believed him and left. Returning to his apartment, Naeem attempted to clean up but found the task overwhelming. In distress, he called his cousin and confessed everything over the phone. Initially, his cousin believed he was hallucinating or under the influence of a banned substance, but the seriousness of the situation soon became clear. The cousin contacted Naeem's father, who, with the help of attorneys, insisted that Naeem turn himself in to the authorities, hoping it would reduce his sentence. During his confession, Naeem disclosed the locations where he had disposed of the remains. Additionally, security camera footage showed him discarding garbage bags into a dumpster, with his car visible in the background. Even if he had tried to deny it, the evidence against him was irrefutable. Investigators quickly found the second box in the ravine, prompting forensic experts to examine the remains. Their analysis revealed a shocking truth that completely contradicted Naeem's account. Although the body had been severely burned, there were no injuries consistent with falling down the stairs, no broken bones, no significant bruising, and, most notably, Brenda's neck was unbroken. Instead, the autopsy revealed a far more sinister cause of death. The cartilage in Brenda's throat had been crushed, not accidentally but by forceful pressure from bare hands. Her official cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled. The horror didn't end there. Forensic experts found fabric fibers inside Brenda's mouth, later determined to be from her own scarf. This indicates that it had been forced into her mouth to silence her before the strangulation. Additionally, fresh scratches on Naeem's hands suggested that Brenda had fought back fiercely. The evidence made one thing clear: this was a calculated and deliberate act of violence, not an accident. When Brenda's family and friends were informed of the tragedy, a new detail emerged: her alleged pregnancy, which Naeem had never mentioned. Under questioning, he admitted that Brenda had been pressuring him for weeks, using the pregnancy to influence him. He explained that their relationship had been entirely physical, not romantic, and that there had been no discussions about a future together or starting a family. He claimed that when Brenda revealed she was pregnant, he immediately offered to pay for an abortion, but she refused. This disagreement had sparked several heated arguments. On the night of the incident, Brenda allegedly not only insisted on keeping the baby but also demanded that Naeem marry her. According to Naeem, her demands infuriated him, and, in a fit of rage, he ended her life. However, there was a major flaw in Naeem's story. An autopsy revealed that Brenda was not pregnant. If she had used the pregnancy as leverage, it was an empty claim. Investigators uncovered an even more shocking truth. Brenda had a medical condition that made pregnancy impossible, a fact she had known since her teenage years. So why had she told Naeem she was pregnant? One of Brenda's closest friends explained during questioning that Brenda genuinely believed she was pregnant. She had missed her period, experienced symptoms, and was overjoyed, thinking doctors had been wrong about her condition. When she shared the news with Naeem, he dismissed her claim and cut ties with her. Brenda confided in only 2 close friends about the pregnancy, never saw a doctor to confirm it, and didn't tell her mother. According to her closest friend, she had no intention of manipulating Naeem. She truly believed she was going to be a mother and had started imagining a future with him. Naeem was arrested the same day he turned himself in and shared his version of events. He claimed what happened was an accident. According to him, he panicked and, in his shock, made the horrific decision to dispose of Brenda's body in a brutal way. He also insisted that their connection was purely casual, with no emotional commitment or real relationship. In Argentina, crimes within romantic or domestic relationships are classified as aggravated offenses due to the victim's vulnerable position. Victims typically trust their partner, do not perceive them as a threat, and may have a diminished sense of self-preservation. If the court ruled that Brenda and Naeem had a real relationship, he could face life in prison. However, if he convinced the court it was merely a casual arrangement with no emotional ties, his sentence might be reduced to a maximum of 15 years. Naeem and his legal team, hired by his father, focused on proving this. Naeem's lawyers argued that he and Brenda were never seen together in public, had no shared photos, and had not introduced each other to their families or friends. However, Brenda's family and friends described a different reality. They insisted that Brenda was deeply in love with Naeem and believed he felt the same. She avoided pressuring him or pushing for formal introductions to his family, assuming he simply needed time. One of Naeem's classmates later disclosed that Naeem had never taken Brenda seriously. He enjoyed spending time with her but had been leading her on, giving her false hope. When Brenda told him she was pregnant, he reportedly panicked and became desperate to find a way out. The classmate claimed Naeem had said the baby would never be born or he would end his life. At the time, nobody thought much of his words. However, about a week before the crime, Naeem allegedly approached his cousin, asking if he knew someone who could solve a problem in exchange for money. His cousin dismissed it as a joke and didn't take it seriously. It wasn't until the night of the crime, when Naeem called asking for help to cover up what he had done, that his cousin realized the gravity of the situation. After the tragedy, Naeem's family publicly expressed their condolences to Brenda's loved ones, stating that her loss had devastated their own lives as well. Despite this, his legal team worked to minimize his responsibility, alleging that Brenda had been manipulating and pressuring him. They even accused her of faking the pregnancy to trap him into marriage, claiming she had ulterior motives and saw Naeem as a wealthy and promising husband. Naeem also tried to argue that he acted in a moment of extreme distress, but his defense quickly crumbled. During his first interrogation, he provided detailed descriptions of how he disposed of Brenda's remains, details that were inconsistent with someone allegedly in shock. Additionally, a neighbor's testimony proved damning. The neighbor recounted seeing Naeem grilling on the terrace that night and noted that he appeared calm and composed. The neighbor even remembered Naeem waving hello in a friendly manner, as if everything were normal. The psychiatric evaluation concluded that Naeem was fully aware of his actions at the time of the crime and could be held legally responsible. However, specialists diagnosed him with psychopathic traits, borderline personality disorder, and bipolar affective disorder. Despite these diagnoses, none diminished his legal accountability. Naeem's family was wealthy and well-connected, which could have enabled him to avoid full responsibility. His legal team deliberately delayed the trial, hoping public interest would eventually wane. Brenda's family feared that Naeem might receive a light sentence or even evade justice entirely. Determined to prevent this, Brenda's mother took action. She organized numerous protests and marches, demanding justice for her daughter. Feminist activists also joined the effort, ensuring the case remained in the public spotlight. The trial began in May 2021 and attracted widespread media attention. A key focus of the proceedings was defining the relationship between Naeem and Brenda. His defense attorneys argued that, given his young age, he was not ready for a serious commitment and that his relationship with Brenda was nothing more than a casual fling. If the defense managed to convince the court, Naeem could have received a lighter sentence. Additionally, they sought to prove that the crime was not premeditated, which could have made him eligible for parole within 5 to 7 years. During the trial, Naeem remained cold and detached, showing no remorse for his actions. Following his attorney's advice, he apologized formally to Brenda's family, but his apology came across as insincere and even mocking. On May 14, 2021, Naeem was convicted of aggravated homicide and attempting to conceal the crime. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and was also ordered to pay Brenda's family 3 million pesos in moral damages. Naeem refused to make a final statement and listened to the verdict with an indifferent expression, as if it did not affect him. Immediately after the sentencing, his attorneys announced their intention to file an appeal. As the legal team prepared for the appeal, looking for new witnesses and evidence to support Naeem's innocence, the media uncovered incidents from his past that his parents had previously concealed. 2 former classmates accused Naeem of harassment and aggressive behavior. Both women agreed to testify, describing him as a dangerous individual who could not handle rejection. While he was often pursued by girls, on the occasions when someone rejected his advances, he responded by stalking, threatening, and trying to humiliate them. One classmate described how she had to transfer schools after Naeem tried to force himself on her. When she resisted, he retaliated by spreading malicious rumors and leaking private photos of her online. At the time, his father's legal team had managed to suppress these incidents. In March 2022, a retrial was held for Brenda's case. With the new testimonies considered, the court upheld its original ruling. Naeem Vera was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 51 years.
On December 5, 1975, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, a married couple was on their way home from a school basketball game. At around 8:30 p.m., the wife decided to visit her niece, Lindy, who lived nearby. They parked their car near the apartment complex, and she got out to quickly check on her niece, leaving her husband in the car. However, when she reached the apartment, she discovered that the front door was unlocked. Cautiously peering inside, she saw a knocked-over floor lamp and other items scattered around. The disarray of the apartment indicated that a fight had occurred. When she noticed strange stains on the floor resembling blood, she stepped into the living room. What she discovered would haunt her forever. In the center of the room lay Lindy, with a knife stabbed into her throat. Overwhelmed with panic, she ran out of the house and hurried to her car to call the police. The police arrived at the scene and were baffled about who could have had a conflict with the young 19-year-old girl, who had recently gotten married. They wondered what could have led to her brutal murder. Lindy Sue Beekler was born on January 31, 1956. Her parents divorced when she was very young. She was raised by her mother. Her father moved to the suburbs, remarried, and had a son with his new wife, making him Lindy's half-brother. From a young age, Lindy was curious and cheerful. She loved exploring new activities. Lindy participated in the Girl Scouts, went hiking, enjoyed boating, and joined different clubs. Lindy was a positive person who made everyone feel good. Her bright smile encouraged others to smile too. Above all, she treasured her family. One of her favorite things to do was curl up on the couch with her mother. In those moments, she felt like the happiest person alive because her mother was not only a caring parent, but also her best friend. Recently, Lindy had been employed at a flower shop, where her boss and co-workers described her as very hardworking, humble, and somewhat shy. However, once they got to know her better, Lindy revealed her fun side. She had a great sense of humor. Despite this, she preferred not to be the center of attention. Lindy married at a young age despite her insecurities. Her husband, Philip Beekler, was 5 years older than her. They first met when Lindy was visiting her sister. They were instantly attracted to each other. On October 19th, the year before the attack, Lindy and Philip tied the knot. The ceremony was officiated by Philip's grandfather, who blessed their union, saying they were perfect for one another. Philip worked part-time as an agent at a car rental company while studying art at Millersville State College. It appeared he was inspired by his parents. His mother owned an art gallery and was deeply passionate about art. Lindy is just 2 months away from turning 20 and has recently begun to embrace adult life as a married woman. Philip and Lindy were happily living together in their small one-bedroom apartment. However, Lindy felt uneasy being home alone. She never felt safe since they moved in. She constantly sensed that someone was watching her through the sliding glass door, though she couldn't pinpoint anyone specific. Overall, she was simply afraid to be alone in the apartment. In January, they planned to move to a new place in Manor Township. In the evenings, Lindy got home from work a couple of hours before her husband. She would lock the doors and turn on all the lights, carefully listening to every noise. During the investigation of the crime scene, the police found that Lindy had been stabbed 19 times. The attack involved 2 different knives. One knife, which the attacker had brought, was never found, while the other knife came from Lindy's kitchen. This kitchen knife was still in her neck when her aunt discovered her. Lindy's body showed 11 stab wounds to her chest and upper abdomen, 5 to her back, and 3 to her neck. One of the stabs had pierced the carotid artery, causing her to bleed to death. Experts noted that Lindy had defensive wounds on her hands, suggesting she fought fiercely for her life until the very end. The apartment was in chaos, with blood everywhere. It appeared that, after finishing her shift at the flower shop, Lindy had stopped to buy groceries, as bags of food were left on the kitchen table, still unpacked. This indicates that the attack occurred right after she returned home. Several pieces of evidence were collected at the crime scene. A shoe print, likely size 10 or 11, was discovered on the kitchen floor. This print suggested that the attacker was likely a large, strong man. Another piece of evidence hinted at a possible motive, although Lindy was fully clothed when found. Detectives suspected she had been abused. Male fluid was discovered on her underwear, which could provide the perpetrator's DNA. However, in 1975, forensic capabilities were limited. Experts could only identify the attacker's blood type and compare it with that of a suspect, but they needed to identify a suspect first. Unfortunately, that was where the evidence trail ended. The police also lacked the perpetrator's fingerprints, as the knife handle found in Lindy's throat was wrapped in a kitchen towel. The news of Lindy's tragic death devastated her family. Relatives called Philip at work, telling him he needed to come home immediately because something had happened to Lindy. As he rushed to their apartment, he feared the worst, but he could never have imagined that his beloved wife had been brutally killed. The police did not allow Philip inside the apartment, leaving him confused about what had happened. They kept him in the hallway until he found out the heartbreaking news that Lindy was dead. Seeing how pale he became, medics gave him a sedative, and the police took him to his mother's house. For about 4 days, Philip felt lost. He couldn't tell whether it was day or night or how much time had passed since the tragedy. He had to sit and wait for answers while the police continued their investigation. Detectives interviewed her co-workers and employer, and none of them noticed anything unusual about her behavior. Lindy went to work at the flower shop in a good mood. That day, she did not appear anxious or scared. There were no dissatisfied customers. Everything was completely normal. Lindy excitedly shared with her colleagues about the Christmas gift she had prepared for her husband. That evening, she calmly got into her car, waved goodbye to her colleagues, and drove home. Unbeknownst to anyone, it would be her last evening alive. Around 5:30 p.m., after work, Lindy went to the car dealership where her husband, Philip, worked to pick up his paycheck. She cashed the check at the bank and then went to a nearby grocery store to buy groceries, filling 4 bags. Afterward, she headed home, parked her car, and began unloading the bags. It seemed likely she would need to make 2 trips. At that moment, someone likely entered her apartment and attacked her. Detectives speculated on this since there were no signs of forced entry, and Lindy was not the kind of person to let a stranger into her home. This led the police to believe that Lindy knew her attacker, felt safe being alone with them. The first person the detectives looked at as a suspect was the victim's husband, Philip. However, the family and friends insisting that Philip and Lindy were a happy couple. Philip deeply loved Lindy and felt incredibly lucky to be dating her. Amazed that someone so beautiful would be interested in him, he said she changed his life for the better by inspiring him to enroll in college and pursue painting. In return, he supported her dream of opening a flower shop. When Lindy was killed, it devastated Philip. He couldn't bear to stay in their apartment, where every corner reminded him of her, so he moved out. Although he had a strong alibi, investigators were slow to clear him as a suspect. Following Lindy's death, Philip felt lost. He wandered the streets for hours, dropped out of college. They had dreamt of finishing their studies, starting a family, and planning their future together. Now, in an instant, all their dreams collapsed, like a sandcastle washed away by the tide. Philip had to completely rebuild his life in light of this tragic reality. The second suspect in the investigation was Bob, Lindy's direct supervisor. His favorable comments and positive evaluations of Lindy took an unexpected turn. The day before her tragic death, Lindy baked him blueberry muffins for his birthday. Bob spoke so highly of her that police began to question whether he had developed an inappropriate attachment. At 35 years old, single, and without an alibi, Bob caught the attention of the authorities, prompting them to scrutinize him more closely. The pressure became overwhelming, leading him to hire a lawyer to safeguard his privacy. Bob passed a lie detector test and fully cooperated with the police. After clearing both Lindy's husband and Bob as suspects, the police interviewed hundreds of people, including friends, family, and acquaintances. Yet they found no one who might have wanted to harm her. Neighbors were also questioned, but no one reported seeing anything unusual that day. The atmosphere in the apartment complex grew tense as residents began purchasing weapons for protection. While violence in other neighborhoods was concerning, the murder of a young woman next door felt particularly alarming. A note from the police was taped to the Beekler's front door, indicating that it was a crime scene and restricting access for local residents. This served as a constant reminder of the tragedy and the unsettling reality that the killer might still be nearby. The investigation hit a dead end. The only clue from neighbors was a report of an unfamiliar dark-colored car parked outside Lindy's house at the time of her death, with its headlights on. Even if the driver was not involved in the crime, they could have been a witness. However, locating the car proved to be impossible. Neighbors' descriptions varied widely, and no one could recall the license plate number. Meanwhile, the police station was overwhelmed with calls. Although some leads seemed promising, none led to concrete answers, forcing investigators to develop their own theories. One theory suggested that Lindy was being stalked by someone who observed her and her husband's routines, waiting for the right moment to attack. It's possible the intruder entered the apartment while Lindy was unloading groceries, or that it was a burglar who planned to steal valuables, but panicked and assaulted her with a knife when she unexpectedly returned. However, the burglary theory was weak because Lindy's purse, containing her jewelry, was still in the apartment. Additionally, the nature of the abuse assault did not align with typical burglar behavior. The police eventually identified an 18-year-old suspect, who was arrested. He was known for committing terrible acts. He had already attacked 4 women, binding them with their own clothing and stabbing them with a screwdriver. In one instance, when a victim attempted to flee, he chased her in his car and tried to run her over. The location and timing of his crimes made the police suspect his involvement in Lindy's attack. However, investigations revealed he was not connected to that incident, as he was at work that day, supported by multiple colleagues. In December 1976, Lindy's family visited her grave to pay their respects. What they found left them in shock. Someone had vandalized the grave. The headstone was covered in knife marks. Pieces of it were scattered nearby, and the rest was splattered with red spray paint. The police took this incident seriously, as they believed the vandal might have also been involved in Lindy's death. The use of a knife suggested the vandal was aware of how Lindy had died, and notably, only her grave had been targeted in the entire cemetery. Since the family had kept the burial location private, It indicated that the vandal had intentionally sought it out, possibly by following family members. Unfortunately, the detectives were unable to identify the culprit. An entire year went by without any answers, leaving Lindy's family in a state of confusion and distress about what happened to her. In the following years, detectives looked into many people who were connected to Lindy's life. They examined her mother's boyfriend, looked into frequent customers of the flower shop, and even explored possible connections to serial killers active in Pennsylvania at that time. In their search for answers, they even consulted psychics. Despite these efforts, the case of Lindy Beekler's death remained unsolved. 25 years after Lindy's tragic death, the lead detective retired, leaving the Lindy case as one of the oldest unsolved cases in Lancaster County. In 2006, the investigation into Lindy's death was transferred to a special group in Pennsylvania that focused on old unsolved cases, utilizing new techniques and perspectives. However, they too were unable to make any progress. Decades after his wife's death, Philip Beekler discovered the DNA analysis techniques used to convict the perpetrator. He believed these methods could also be applied to his wife Lindy's case. In 2019, police applied these techniques to analyze DNA from the crime scene and created a composite sketch of a potential suspect based on the DNA. A computer program produced two portraits. One depicted how the suspect likely appeared at the time of Lindy's attack, and the other showed what the suspect might look like at age 65. While the portraits weren't exact representations, they revealed important details about the suspect, including fair skin, brown eyes, dark hair, and possible distinctive features. Despite this progress, locating the suspect was still difficult. The DNA sample was analyzed by C.C. Moore, a well-known American genetic genealogist. She discovered that the DNA found on the victim's underwear in 1975 was connected to a small town in Italy. Moore invested a lot of time identifying individuals with Italian ancestry who were living in Lancaster County at the time of Lindy's murder. She traced the migration patterns from this small Italian town to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. After ruling out over 2,000 individuals with similar genetic profiles, she was able to use public records to narrow it down to one suspect. This led her to identify the likely killer, a man named David Sinopoli. Investigators checked the name against existing databases, but found no records. This man had never been noticed by the police before, and his name was not on any suspect lists. However, while reviewing the case files, detectives learned that David lived in the same apartment complex as the Beeklers. To establish his connection to Lindy's death, they needed to obtain David's DNA. On February 11, 2022, David was at Philadelphia International Airport waiting for his flight. To pass the time, he bought coffee, not realizing that police were observing him from afar. After David finished his coffee, he threw the empty cup into a trash bin. An officer then discreetly collected the discarded cup and placed it in a plastic bag for further examination. The cup was sent to a lab for DNA analysis, which revealed a match between the DNA on the cup and the seminal fluid found on Lindy Beekler's underwear, confirming that David Sinopoli had been at the crime scene. Additionally, 2 drops of blood found on her stockings matched his DNA, providing further evidence. Initially, investigators thought the significant amount of blood at the crime scene belonged to the victim. However, they also considered the possibility that the perpetrator had injured himself and left behind traces of his blood. On July 17, 2022, around 7 a.m., police arrived at David's home, a few miles from the site where Lindy was murdered years earlier. He did not resist arrest, but his wife, who had been married to him for 36 years, was completely shocked. They had 3 children and 9 grandchildren, all of whom were unaware that they had been living with a criminal and murderer. Following the tragic murder of 19-year-old Lindy, David had lived quietly for nearly 47 years, never revealing his past and believing he would escape punishment. After David was arrested, Lindy's family had a reason to celebrate. Unfortunately, many family members never got to see justice served. Lindy's father died in 2000, and her mother followed in 2007. Her husband, Philip, was still alive and had remarried around 1990. Even though he hadn't initially planned to, he wanted to honor Lindy's hopes for him by finishing college, attending graduate school, and becoming an artist, which he accomplished. Eventually, he was able to let go of the tragedy and move forward with his life. The day after David's arrest, the police held a press conference announcing that they considered the case of Lindy Beekler's murder closed. Friends and family of David struggled to believe he was involved, thinking there must have been a misunderstanding. However, it's painful to acknowledge that this man evaded consequences for his actions for nearly 50 years, living as if nothing had happened after taking a young woman's future. Years went by, but the police never forgot about the case and continuously worked to solve it. Eventually, justice was served. David Sinopoli was taken into custody without the option for bail. Initially, he strongly denied any connection to Beekler's death, but as the trial date approached, he changed his mind and agreed to a plea deal. On October 19, 2023, 48 years after the crime, David Sinopoli pleaded guilty to third-degree murder, aggravated assault, and burglary. He received a prison sentence of 25 to 50 years. The judge mentioned that considering the defendant's age, this effectively amounted to a life sentence. David never explained why he killed Lindy by brutally stabbing her 19 times and violating her body to fulfill his selfish desires. Lindy and David were neighbors in the same apartment complex, but there is no evidence that they ever interacted prior to the crime. This leaves the true motives behind his actions a mystery, even to the police. It's possible that David was strongly attracted to her and eventually succumbed to his hidden urges. His primal instincts took over, which is why he is now in prison. A young woman was on her way home after spending a night out with friends, but she never arrived. Jessica Lynn Callagher was born on May 8, 1982 in Austin, Texas, where she lived with her parents and two brothers. Jessica was warm, friendly, and easily made friends. Beyond her sociable nature, she was very ambitious, had a clear goal since high school. She wanted to become a teacher. To achieve this, she enrolled at Texas State University and earned her bachelor's degree in science. Jessica then decided to pursue a master's degree while working as a teaching assistant at an elementary school and taking a part-time job at a grocery store. Despite her busy schedule, she maintained a positive attitude, believing that her hard work would eventually lead to success. On September 7, 2009, Jessica had a day off. She spent it with her friends and cousin, Melanie. They began the day by lounging at the pool and went out for dinner. Afterwards, they visited a bar to play pool. At the end of the night, Jessica became the designated driver, ensuring everyone got home safely. She dropped off Melanie last, around 1:30 in the morning. Melanie invited Jessica to stay over, but Jessica declined since she had an early shift at the grocery store and needed to stop at a 24-hour shop to buy food for her dogs. After saying goodbye to her cousin, she left. A few hours later, as morning arrived, Melanie got a call from one of Jessica's co-workers. She learned that Jessica had missed her shift, which was unusual since Jessica never skipped work without a valid reason. At that time, Jessica had been promoted to store manager, adding to her responsibilities. When he worried, Melanie called Lori's several friends, but none had heard from Jessica that morning. She then contacted her brother, John Ridenour, who lived with Jessica. John told Melanie he hadn't seen her either. John, a police officer, had started his shift at 5:30 a.m. and hadn't noticed if Jessica had come home during the night. He also hadn't checked her room before leaving for work. Concerned, he quickly returned home. But Jessica was still missing. It seemed she hadn't been home at all, as her dogs were acting unusually, almost as if they hadn't been fed in a while. This raised alarm bells. Something was definitely wrong. John quickly contacted his colleagues at the police department to track Jessica's phone. The signal led them to a restaurant near her home. Melanie and her boyfriend hurried to the restaurant and soon found Jessica's car in the parking lot. However, when they approached and opened the door, they were horrified to see that Jessica was slumped in the driver's seat, unresponsive. Her skin was badly sunburned, and the inside of the car was extremely hot. Melanie's boyfriend immediately called the police, who sent officers and an ambulance to the scene. Paramedics confirmed that Jessica was dead, and her body was taken for further investigation. It was evident that she had likely been attacked. Investigators started looking into Jessica's car. They quickly noticed that the driver's seat was pushed too far back. Given the injuries she had, Detectives believe she might have been attacked while still in the car. They also found that her keys, wallet, and credit cards were missing. On the back seat, there was a bag of dog food, indicating that Jessica had been in the car since the night before, as she intended to go to the store right after dropping off her cousin. After searching the car thoroughly, detectives entered the restaurant near the parking lot where Jessica's car was found. This is when the investigation took an unexpected twist. One of the restaurant employees informed the investigators that when she arrived for work early that morning, she saw Jessica's car and noticed that Jessica was still alive at that time. The witness reported that Jessica was sitting inside her car, completely undressed and behaving oddly, as if she were under the influence. Although the scene was unusual, the employee didn't dwell on it and went inside to begin her shift. Shortly after, she stepped outside again and saw Jessica sitting by her car. Jessica had put her clothes back on but was still acting strangely, just sitting there and running her hands through her hair. When the employee went outside a third time, Jessica was back in her car, talking to herself and making odd hand gestures. The police later discovered several more witnesses who had seen Jessica alive that morning. Despite her unusual behavior, no one called for help or checked on her well-being. After interviewing the witnesses, detectives returned to Melanie and asked if Jessica might have been drinking alcohol or taking banned substance. Melanie firmly stated that Jessica had been sober that night, as she was the designated driver responsible for getting everyone home safely and had work the next day. She also claimed that Jessica had never used banned substance. The situation puzzled the investigators, but they later uncovered a possible explanation. Medical examiners discovered signs of strangulation on Jessica's body, including marks from hands and a likely rope or belt. She also had numerous bruises, scratches, and she had been abuse assaulted. Experts noted that her trauma could have resulted in a brain injury, which was worsened by the hours she spent inside a hot car in the sun. This might clarify her unusual behavior, her disorientation, and why she didn't call for help. It is likely that Jessica was so affected that she didn't understand what was happening to her, eventually leading to death. Toxicology reports confirm Melanie's earlier statement. Jessica had no alcohol or banned substance in her system. If any of the witnesses had called for medical assistance, doctors might have been able to save her, but it was now too late. Detectives needed to determine who was responsible for her death. They began by searching for CCTV footage, but unfortunately, there were no cameras in the parking lot where Jessica was found. However, they made an important discovery. If she had bought dog food late at night, it was likely that she stopped at the 24-hour Walmart across the street. The detectives obtained the store's security footage, which showed Jessica arriving, walking into the store alone, and there were no indications that anything was wrong. She went straight to the pet food aisle, picked up a large bag, and proceeded to the checkout. Everything appeared normal, but as she exited the store, detectives observed something noteworthy. Just a few seconds later, a man followed her outside. Detectives reviewed more footage and noted that the man arrived at Walmart just minutes before Jessica. He parked at the far end of the parking lot, entered the store, but instead of shopping, he went straight to the restroom and then left. When detectives checked the entrance camera, they saw him following closely behind Jessica and appearing to be in a hurry. However, there was an issue. Jessica's car was parked behind a large tree, which blocked the camera's view. Despite this, the footage allowed them to track the man's movements. He approached Jessica's car, went behind the tree, and did not emerge again. 2 minutes later, Jessica's car exited the parking lot. A surveillance camera later recorded a vehicle arriving at the restaurant parking lot where Jessica was discovered the next morning. Shortly after, an individual got out of Jessica's car and walked across the lot toward the parking area of Walmart. This individual then got into the same vehicle that a suspicious man had driven earlier. Detectives were nearly certain that this person was involved in Jessica's murder, but the quality of the surveillance footage made it difficult to identify him or his vehicle clearly. However, the detectives still had some options. With Jessica's credit cards missing, they examined her accounts for any recent transactions and discovered a lead. One of her cards had been used at a gas station approximately 20 minutes after her car was left at the restaurant. They obtained the gas station's surveillance footage and quickly recognized the red pickup truck associated with their suspect. When they checked the camera near the register, their suspicions were confirmed. It was indeed the same man. This provided proof that he had Jessica's credit card, making him appear even more guilty. The detectives then released the footage of the suspect and his vehicle to the news, seeking help from the public for any information about him. Detectives continued their search for more evidence, but found no new leads. Days went by without any significant developments until they received a call from a woman. She claimed that the man in the security footage resembled her fiancé's best friend, Crispin Harmel. She also mentioned that Crispin was expected to visit that evening to repay some money he owed, but he never arrived. After seeing the news report about Jessica's murder, she recognized him in the surveillance video. Although she was shocked to think he could be involved in such a terrible crime, she understood that she needed to inform the police. Detectives started investigating Crispin's background and soon found a significant detail. Just weeks before Jessica's murder, a patrol officer had stopped him for driving with an expired license. When the investigators examined the officer's body camera footage, they noticed that Crispin closely matched the description of their suspect. Moreover, he was wearing the same baseball cap as the person in the surveillance video. 5 days after Jessica's murder, police visited Crispin's home. They immediately noticed his pickup truck, which was the same model as the one captured on surveillance footage. However, there were some changes. The chrome details visible in the video had been painted over in black. When detectives knocked on his door, Crispin surprised them by quickly admitting that he had met Jessica that night. He explained that they connected through an adult website and arranged to meet for a casual hookup. Crispin said they met in the Walmart parking lot, where he got into Jessica's car. He claimed she drove them to a park, where they had intimate before returning to Walmart. Before parting ways, they talked in her car, during which he mentioned his financial struggles. According to him, Jessica then gave him her credit card so he could buy gas. After saying their goodbyes, they went their separate ways. The next day, after seeing news reports about Jessica's murder, Crispin panicked and feared he might be accused. He disposed of her credit card and repainted parts of his truck. Although Crispin recounted his story confidently, detectives recognized it as a lie, viewing it as a desperate attempt to evade responsibility. The surveillance footage contradicted his account. He claimed they had planned to meet in the Walmart parking lot, but he only approached Jessica after she had returned to her car. He also said she drove him back after their supposed meeting, but the footage clearly showed him walking back to his own truck alone. Jessica's car remained in the parking lot until the next morning, and no one else interacted with it. Detectives collected Crispin's phone and computer, as well as Jessica's devices, because they suspected there was no evidence of communication between them. No messages, no calls, nothing. In fact, Jessica had never visited the adult website that Crispin claimed they used to arrange their meeting. However, when investigators examined Crispin's computer, they discovered something noteworthy. Just hours after the police found Jessica's body, he searched for and read several news articles about her murder. Jessica's friends and family also doubted Crispin's story. They believed she would never seek a one-night stand or meet a stranger in a parking lot at night. That behavior was simply not in her character. Additionally, she had told a friend that she needed to rest before her morning shift and still had to feed her dogs. There was no way she would have gone out for a secret late-night date. Investigators thought that Crispin was trying to shift the blame onto others. However, the overwhelming evidence against him made it difficult for him to create a credible excuse. Based on the surveillance footage, detectives reconstructed the likely sequence of events. Crispin probably saw Jessica inside Walmart and decided to target her. He followed her to her car, got in, and used threats to prevent her from crying out or resisting. It seems he then forced her to drive to a nearby park, where he abused her. Afterward, he returned to the parking lot near Walmart, closer to his own truck. Before leaving, he strangled her and took her wallet and credit cards. When the police confronted Crispin about the incident, he stopped answering questions and requested a lawyer. Despite there being strong evidence against him, investigators faced a significant challenge that could jeopardize the entire case. Jessica had survived for several hours after the attack, which posed a major legal issue. The problem was that medical experts could not definitively explain why this occurred. Cases like hers were so rare that they had not been thoroughly studied. While the official cause of death was identified as strangulation, there had never been a documented case of someone being strangled, surviving for hours, and then dying later as a direct result of the attack. The only way to solidify the case would be a confession, but Crispin refused to admit to any wrongdoing. Detectives faced a challenging situation. They believed that Crispin was guilty of Jessica's murder, as no one else could have committed the crime. However, since Jessica had survived until the morning after the attack, there was a significant concern that the case might not hold up in court. To bolster their case, investigators examined Jessica's car for more evidence, but found nothing. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, and no other evidence linking Crispin to the crime scene. Prosecutors discovered a temporary way to proceed. They charged Crispin with evidence tampering linked to Jessica's case. Crispin had confessed to disposing of her credit card and repainting his truck, which were obvious attempts to conceal his actions. They had his own admissions as evidence. In May 2010, Crispin pleaded guilty and received a 10-year prison sentence for evidence tampering. Detectives were committed to achieving justice for Jessica and refused to give up. They needed strong scientific evidence to link Crispin to her murder. For years, their efforts led to no significant breakthroughs. Then in 2013, they found a scientific article that changed the course of the investigation. The article discussed cases in which strangulation did not immediately cause death, but instead resulted in a condition called delayed death syndrome. This syndrome can lead to brain damage, causing victims to feel confused, disoriented, and unable to seek help. The article's findings closely aligned with Jessica's behavior following the attack and reinforced the initial medical examiner's belief that she had suffered a brain injury, leaving her unaware of her situation until it was too late. Detectives contacted the author of this article right away and began constructing a murder case against Crispin using advanced medical science as support. In May 2014, Crispin was officially arrested for murder, but he still maintained his innocence throughout the process. During the trial, his defense attorney emphasized a critical point. There was no DNA evidence linking Crispin to the crime. The prosecution contended that Jessica had fought back during the attack and likely scratched her assailant, which should have left DNA traces under her fingernails. However, forensic experts for the prosecution highlighted an important detail. Jessica had been trapped in her car for hours in extreme heat. At such high temperatures, DNA breaks down quickly, and by the time her body was examined, any genetic material under her nails would have completely degraded and been unrecoverable. Prosecutors built their case against Crispin using strong forensic evidence and extensive surveillance footage that strongly indicated his guilt. However, a complication arose when Crispin's lawyer challenged the accuracy of the timestamps on the video evidence. Initially, the footage obtained from the security cameras did not have any timestamps. Since the timing of events was critical, prosecutors applied specialized software to add timestamps later, which gave the defense a chance to question the integrity of the evidence. Crispin's attorney contended that this was a significant issue because he had not received the original footage with the timestamps included. Ultimately, the judge ruled in favor of the defense, resulting in a mistrial. Consequently, Crispin avoided conviction due to this technicality. Nevertheless, he remained in prison, serving his 10-year sentence for evidence tampering. Prosecutors quickly started preparing for a new trial. Over the next few years, Crispin's legal team worked diligently to stop the retrial, arguing that it would violate his rights. Ultimately, however, a higher court decided in favor of the prosecution, allowing the trial to proceed. The new trial began in 2018, and this time, the prosecution meticulously addressed every aspect of the case, ensuring the defense couldn't take advantage of any loopholes. They successfully convinced the jury of Crispin's guilt, resulting in his conviction for murder. Crispin Harmel received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors opted not to seek the death penalty, believing it might jeopardize their chances of a guilty verdict. They were aware that the delayed death syndrome argument could create doubts for the jurors, and in death penalty cases, a conviction requires complete certainty. A few years later, Crispin attempted to appeal his sentence, but his request was turned down. Consequently, he is still in prison with very little chance of being released. Jessica's family expressed gratitude to the investigators and prosecutors for their unwavering commitment to seeking justice, even though it took 9 years to achieve a verdict. However, they also shared that they had hoped the sentencing would provide them with some relief and closure. But ultimately, no punishment for Crispin could ever really alleviate their suffering. Yvonne Lohr dreamed of discovering the world, feeling free, exploring ancient lands, and sharing joyful selfies from the farthest corners of the earth. Then, on a bright morning in Egypt, everything changed. After a series of frantic text messages, there was only silence. This is the story of Yvonne Lohr, a daughter, a sister, a traveler. A group of tourists, including her, goes missing under shocking circumstances need unraveling a mysterious plot far from home. Yvonne Lohr was born on May 11, 2000 in Colombia. She is the eldest daughter of Mary Sanchez and Diego Lohr, and grew up with her younger brother, with whom she shared a strong and inseparable bond. Although little is known about her early life, it is clear that, as an adult, Yvonne made a courageous choice. She moved to Europe in hopes of a brighter future. She settled in Barcelona, Spain. Her friends and family described her as strong, very sensitive, and extremely loyal. She cared deeply for her loved ones and supported her family in Colombia by working multiple jobs, sometimes holding as many as 3 at the same time. Although her exact positions in Spain are not clear, her determination to support others was unquestionable. Yvonne loved adventure, and her social media accounts were filled with photos from her travels, showcasing her independence and lively spirit. In April 2025, Yvonne organized a trip that would turn out to be her most unforgettable adventure, and also her last. This time, she wouldn't be traveling alone. Her close friend Stefania Bedoya, a Colombian woman 5 years older than her, would be joining her. Stefania became well known in Colombia after winning the title of Miss Antioquia in the 2023-2024 pageant. She had been trained as a flight attendant and was currently working in digital marketing and modeling. Yvonne Lohr and her close friend Stefania Bedoya had planned the trip in advance with great anticipation. Stefania arrived in Barcelona on April 15th. After spending a few days together, they flew to Cairo, Egypt, on April 24th. Why Egypt? The choice of destination was intentional. Both had tickets to Samna, one of the region's largest electronic music festivals, which was scheduled for April 25th and 26th. For Yvonne, the timing couldn't have been better. She was about to celebrate her 25th birthday in the most exciting way she could imagine, dancing under the stars in a new country. The festival began with happiness music, dancing, laughter, and meeting new people. That was when they met Jessie Escobar. Jessie introduced herself at the event and was accompanied by 2 men, whom she also introduced as her friends. The 5 seemed to connect naturally and easily. Soon, the girls and their new friends began spending more and more time together. Yvonne, always open and spontaneous, shared stories about their night on Instagram. In her videos from Friday night, April 25th, she appeared radiant and joyful, surrounded by vibrant lights and lively energy. By that point, the girls trusted Jessie enough that when she asked for the address of their hotel, they gave it to her. Jessie told them she would pick them up on April 27th at 9 a.m. to take them to another party. Everything changed on the morning of April 27th. At about 11:04 a.m., Yvonne started sending urgent messages to her family. But these weren't her usual cheerful updates, they were warnings. She wrote that someone was trying to hurt them and wanted to take them away by force. She shared her live location and urgently asked for help. In another message, she pleaded for the police to get involved. She said there were men outside their room and more cars were arriving. Every word was filled with panic. Despite her distress, Yvonne quickly contacted a friend in Spain. This time, she spoke openly and without hesitation. She said clearly, "If anything happens to me, I hold a woman on social media named Mescore1020 responsible." She sent a screenshot of the profile. Investigators later confirmed what the message suggested. Mescore 2020 was Jessie, the woman they had met at the festival. Then Everything went silent. Yvonne stopped answering messages. Her phone was turned off, and her family never heard from her again. As more time passed without any news from Yvonne after her last message, her family became increasingly worried. One call after another went unanswered. What frightened them even more was that Stefania had also gone silent. 2 days passed. On April 29th, there was finally a small update. The family managed to get in touch with a woman named Natalia, who knew both parties. Natalia confirmed that Stefania was alive and staying at a hotel. This brought relief, but it was only temporary. Stefania didn't contact Yvonne's family directly until the following day, April 30th. Her words turned their world upside down. Yvonne was in intensive care and in a coma. There was no explanation or further details, just this stark, simple fact. Yvonne's parents were shocked by how calm Stefania sounded. No one seemed panicked. Everything remained calm, and no one hurried to explain things to them. This wasn't how a close friend would react, especially not someone who had traveled around the world with her. But the odd events continued. For several days, Stefania would not reveal which hospital it was. No location was shared, no photos were uploaded, and no updates were provided. The family felt isolated by distance and language barriers, unable to get help or clear information as time quickly slipped away. Yvonne's family began searching frantically. They contacted all the hospitals, clinics, and emergency rooms in Cairo. After many attempts and several formal requests, they finally received confirmation that Yvonne was in a public hospital. Her condition was very serious. She had several broken bones and needed a ventilator to help her breathe. The doctors said that her brain activity and vital signs were almost undetectable. When faced with something unimaginable, her family did everything they could. They started a fundraising campaign to collect donations for Mary, Yvonne's mother, so she could travel to Egypt and support her daughter. The response was incredible, coming from friends, strangers, Colombians, and compassionate people worldwide. Thanks to the generous donations, Mary was able to quickly book a flight, hurrying toward a reunion she had never expected to happen in this way. There was still a glimmer of hope, the chance to move Yvonne to Spain for specialized treatment, and the thought that she might survive after all. But that hope quickly faded. Yvonne passed away on May 4th, 2025, after spending 8 days in a coma. Her injuries were too severe, and the trauma was too great for her body to recover. Her family was heartbroken and overwhelmed, but they couldn't grieve not yet. They wanted to know the truth. They began urging the governments of Egypt and Colombia to conduct a prompt and transparent investigation. The family wanted to understand what had happened in the last hours of their daughter's life. The messages Yvonne sent before disappearing were soon discovered, revealing unsettling information. In one message, Yvonne warned that the men she was with claimed to be producers and promised to make her a star in the music industry. This was not true. Her family also revealed that these men were only known by their nicknames, El Serbio and El Doctor. Then, something unexpected happened. I had a conversation with Stefania. Stefania stated that Yvonne had fallen from a significant height when she was not there. But that was only the beginning of a series of contradictions. Over time, Stefania's account of what happened started to change. At first, the differences were subtle, but they gradually became more noticeable. With each new version, there were more questions than answers. Egyptian authorities said they had started an investigation. They stated that Stefania had been questioned and that attempts were being made to find Jesse and the two unidentified men. However, there were still no tangible outcomes, no arrests, no clues, and no resolution. Yvonne's family looked on in shock as the investigation began to lose momentum. They publicly accused both the Egyptian authorities and the Colombian consulate of negligence, making their claims widely known on both continents. From the beginning, they encountered indifference, delays, and a lack of support. Time was running out. The investigation was progressing too slowly. Meanwhile, they faced another difficult challenge. Yvonne's body was still in Egypt. The family didn't have enough money to bring her home, so they appealed to the public for help once again. A second fundraising campaign was launched, not only to seek justice, but also to give people the opportunity to say goodbye. As the days passed without any answers, Yvonne's family and friends were overwhelmed by a harsh truth. Those responsible for explaining what happened either remained silent or, even more troubling, continued to give conflicting accounts. Her loved ones reached out to the public as a last resort. They launched a widespread campaign on social media and in the news, not to assign blame, but to ensure that no other case would go unnoticed. They wanted to know the truth. They needed to know why Yvonne died and who was with her when it happened. On Tuesday, May 6th, a powerful new voice joined the fight for justice. Angie Giraldo, a close friend of Yvonne's, posted a 5-minute video that quickly went viral on the internet. She pointed out troubling contradictions in Stefania's earlier statements and also presented important new evidence. Angie's message was not only one of grief, but also a plea for clarity, truth, and for the world to reflect on Yvonne's final moments. The video spread rapidly on social media, sparking renewed public outrage and stronger calls for a thorough investigation. Angie explained her case clearly, providing screenshots, photos, and video clips. She said these were first posted by Stefania on social media, but were later deleted for unknown reasons. Luckily, those posts were saved. This material provides a more complete view, showing parts of the girls' trip and their interactions following the incident that left Yvonne fighting for her life. The findings contradicted the official accounts. They raised questions about the timeline, the people involved, and the overall story that was being presented. Based on the evidence Angie gathered and presented, Stefania and Jessie were the two women most involved in the situation. Neither of them was able to give a clear or consistent explanation of what happened. Both their public and private statements were inconsistent, often containing gaps and contradictions. Neither woman could provide a clear timeline, explain how Yvonne was injured, or give a logical account of events from beginning to end. Instead of providing clarity, their statements only created more confusion. As a result, confusion increased, suspicion intensified, and people around the world began paying closer attention. Stefania herself exhibited some of the most troubling inconsistencies. Angie included social media posts that Stefania had shared after the incident, and these posts appeared to be completely out of touch with reality. At one point, Stefania casually mentioned to a friend that she planned to eat at a luxury restaurant in Cairo, even though, at that same time, Yvonne was in the hospital in critical condition, fighting for her life. Despite everything, Stefania seemed unconcerned. The tone of her messages angered people, who wondered why she was not showing any sadness, urgency, or compassion. As these details came to light, more people began to doubt Stefania's involvement and to wonder if she had been completely honest. Stefania's actions were concerning, but Jessie's reaction was equally troubling, urgently seeking answers. Yvonne's family reached out to Jessie personally, hoping she could provide a clear explanation, something that would bring them peace, or at least help them understand. Instead, they received unclear answers, evasive voice messages, and even more conflicting statements. Jessie never provided a specific timeline. She spoke vaguely and did not seem concerned. Her account did not clarify or explain what actually happened that night. Her hesitation led people to become more distrustful and increasingly believe that important information was being withheld. In another leaked conversation, Stefania was overheard advising someone to remain calm and to follow all instructions. She referred to what happened to Yvonne merely as a difficult situation, without providing any details or showing any concern. To Yvonne's loved ones, these reactions did not indicate fear or trauma, but rather a sense of detachment, which only made them more suspicious. Let's remember that Stefania initially told the family that Yvonne had fallen from a high place. She claimed that she was not present during the incident and only learned about it afterwards. However, there were significant gaps in her account. She could not specify where the fall had taken place, when it had happened, or how Yvonne had been discovered. Her unclear story was already falling apart, and as more evidence emerged, her silence seemed less like confusion and more like she was hiding something. In a video that Stefania later deleted from social media, she said she was leaving a hotel in Cairo because she believed that a human trafficking ring was operating there. She claimed that she had been rescued and was now receiving threats, although she showed no visible injuries. Later, she gave a completely different version of what had happened. In this new statement, Stefania confirmed that she was with Yvonne when everything occurred. She mentioned both of them. As they were walking down the street, Jesse and two unidentified men were behind them. Stefania said that Yvonne began to panic and showed obvious signs of anxiety. Stefania tried to calm her down, but then, according to Stefania, Yvonne went ahead on her own to look for a safe place. Stefania said she took a taxi to try to catch up, but when she reached the spot where she expected to find Yvonne, Yvonne was no longer there. She said that was the moment when everything fell apart. Once again, nothing matched up. The timeline was unclear, and the locations were not specified. To make things even more confusing, Stefania later reported that Yvonne had been found with several broken bones. All of her belongings were still with her except for her passport, which was missing. Another warning sign, another unanswered question. Stefania said she felt completely broken, both emotionally and physically, as she tried to express how devastated she was. However, it was already too late to change what had happened. When those videos were released, social media erupted with activity. People began investigating the backgrounds of both Stefania and Jesse. Rumors circulated about Jesse. Some people accused her of being involved with human trafficking networks, while others claimed she had lived and worked in countries such as Germany and Turkey, specifically mentioning Ankara. Additionally, there were allegations that she had appeared on escort websites. At the same time, Stefania's name resurfaced in reports about her disagreements with Colombian brands, lingering issues from her participation in beauty pageants, and controversies within the modeling industry. Although none of these allegations were ever officially confirmed, rumors and speculation spread widely. As online pressure increased, both women made their social media profiles private, effectively bringing the case to a standstill. To this day, Yvonne's family has not received any clear or official updates from the Egyptian authorities or any government agency. No official communication has been made. This goes beyond negligence. It is outright abandonment. Many international reports warn that Egypt is a high-risk destination for women traveling alone. There are serious and increasing dangers, such as widespread gender-based violence and a largely hidden trafficking crisis. Refugees and migrants, particularly women, are vulnerable to exploitation. Yvonne, a Colombian woman far from home, found herself trapped in this dangerous situation. In Colombia, Yvonne's friends and family continue their fight. Their fundraiser is still ongoing. Although they have raised a substantial amount, it is still not enough to cover the significant expenses caused by this tragedy. Her family suffers from unbearable pain not knowing what happened to her in her final moments. Why do the people who were with her keep changing their stories? And why is no one, including the authorities, willing to tell the whole truth? This is one of the most unsettling cases we've discussed. A young woman died while overseas, and her friends either cannot or will not explain how it happened. The authorities are ignoring the situation. Governments remain silent, and life continues as usual. But her family cannot move on. They deserve honesty and clarity, not just rumors or conflicting information. They have a right to know the truth. They deserve justice in Yvonne Lore's case. A woman was discovered in her home under mysterious and alarming conditions. There were no leads or evidence for detectives to pursue, making it seem like the case would remain unsolved. However, an unexpected phone call changed everything. With one surprising clue, detectives revealed a truth that nobody could have anticipated. Kathy Blair was born on May 3, 1961 in California. She grew up in a caring family with her parents, a brother, and a sister. From a young age, she developed a strong love for the arts, especially music. Singing was her greatest passion. When it came time to choose a career, Kathy made her decision without hesitation. She enrolled at the University of Texas to study vocal performance and moved to Austin. After graduating, Kathy became a music teacher and a choir instructor at a Christian church. She loved her job, and her students admired her greatly. They recognized her deep passion for music, which inspired them. Throughout her life, Kathy was married 2 times, but both marriages ended in divorce. She raised her 2 children, a son and a daughter, as a single parent. In 2013, at the age of 52, Kathy relocated to a new home in a peaceful and safe suburb of Austin. She had long envisioned a place that met all her needs, and she had finally discovered the ideal one. By this time, her children were adults and living independently, while Kathy remained active in her music career, continued to lead the choir. In December 2014, Joseph Hargis, her 27-year-old son, came home to stay with his mother for a few weeks before his next military deployment. He wanted to spend some quality time with her. On December 5th, Joseph went out to meet friends and didn't come back until nearly noon the following day. When he entered the house, he called for his mom but was met with silence. Feeling uneasy, he started to check each room until he reached Kathy's bedroom. What he discovered there was horrifying. She was lying on the floor next to her bed in a pool of blood. Joseph instantly realized she was no longer alive. In a panic, he ran outside and called the police. When investigators arrived, they confirmed that Kathy had been dead for several hours. The large amount of blood at the scene indicated that this was a murder, not an accident. While medical experts examined the body, police began processing the crime scene. They immediately noticed that the drawers from a large jewelry box in her bedroom were pulled out and on the floor. It appeared the killer had taken some of Kathy's jewelry, which led detectives to initially suspect robbery as the motive. However, this theory felt questionable. For one, the intruder had not taken anything else. Valuable items like Kathy's laptop and phone were left untouched and in plain sight. The house showed no signs of being searched for more valuables, indicating the focus was solely on the jewelry. The timing of the break-in was unusual. Nighttime burglaries are rare. Most thieves typically break in during the day when people are at work. Additionally, this neighborhood was known as one of the safest in the city, making such crimes unexpected. Another puzzling aspect was the order of events. It appeared that the killer first murdered Kathy and then searched her home for valuables. Bloodstains on the jewelry box drawers and elsewhere in the bedroom indicated that the attack occurred before the robbery. This implies that the intruder attacked Kathy immediately upon entering her bedroom. There were no signs of forced entry at the front door, but investigators discovered that the back door was left unlocked. When they questioned Joseph about it, he mentioned that his mother frequently kept that door open. This led detectives to consider whether this was truly a robbery or if something more sinister was at play. They began to wonder if the killer had intended to murder Kathy from the start. If so, it raised a troubling possibility. Could the perpetrator have known her? Forensic experts faced significant challenges in their investigation, as they were unable to find any evidence to identify the killer. There were no fingerprints or DNA, leaving them without any leads. The only clue they discovered was a partial shoe print in Kathy's bedroom, found in her blood. Medical examiners concluded that Kathy had died from multiple stab wounds and exhibited signs of strangulation. Importantly, there was no indication of abuse, which strengthened detectives' belief that this crime was not random, but rather personal in nature. With no physical evidence to investigate, police turned their attention to Kathy's close connections, searching for anyone who might have a motive to harm her. They began with her son, as he had the opportunity to commit the crime. However, after verifying his alibi, detectives quickly eliminated him as a suspect. He had been with friends all night, and this was confirmed. Next, they interviewed Kathy's friends and colleagues in hopes of finding any conflicts or grievances, but everyone they spoke to stated that Kathy had no enemies. Kathy was well-liked, avoided conflicts, and dedicated most of her time to the choir. Just when it seemed like the investigation had reached a standstill, detectives uncovered a new lead. Several of Kathy's close friends revealed that she often talked about her second ex-husband, whom she had divorced 4 years prior to her murder. Kathy described their breakup as difficult. Her ex-husband continually harassed her and wouldn't accept their separation. She even confided in friends that she was concerned for her safety and requested that they not share her new address with him. Detectives located the ex-husband living not far from Austin. When they approached him, his reaction was alarming. As soon as they mentioned Kathy's death, he asked, "Was she shot?" This was suspicious. When they inquired about his activities that night, he claimed to have been in his RV for a short getaway. He allowed detectives to search his RV without a warrant, but they found no evidence, no weapons, no blood, and no signs tying him to the crime. With no solid evidence, they couldn't charge him. He remained a person of interest, but detectives had to keep searching for other potential suspects. A few days later, the detectives received an unexpected call from one of Kathy's friends with some unusual information. She and a group had organized a memorial service for Kathy, and during the ceremony, an unfamiliar man stood up to speak. Immediately, the attendees felt something was off about him. His tone and mannerisms made everyone uncomfortable. Even more puzzling was that none of Kathy's closest friends recognized him. Eventually, one of Kathy's friends identified the man. The friend had seen him before as a sales clerk at a local women's clothing store. The police tracked him down for questioning. The man admitted he had never met Kathy. He mentioned he had read about her murder and felt compelled to attend the memorial. While his explanation was odd, there was no evidence linking him to the crime, so the detectives had to let him go and continued their search for the killer. For several days, the investigation stalled until an unexpected development changed everything. A man contacted the police, claiming he had important information. He explained that he had recently purchased a new scope for his hunting rifle, which included a thermal imaging camera. Eager to try it out, he took a walk in the early hours of December 6th, heading towards a wooded area near his neighborhood. While walking, he noticed a car slowly driving by, which then pulled over to the side of the road. Moments later, a man exited the vehicle and walked down a nearby street, disappearing into the night. At the time, he didn't think much about it, but when he later heard about Kathy's murder, a connection clicked in his mind. He realized that the man he saw was heading in the direction of her house. He remembered that his thermal camera had been recording during his walk, so he reviewed the footage. To his surprise, he found the recording of the man clearly visible as he walked away from the car. This type of imaging only showed the suspect's silhouette, making it very difficult to identify him. However, the video still provided useful information. The man appeared tall, broad-shouldered, and had a unique walking style. Additionally, the camera captured his car, which gave investigators hope that they could at least identify the type of vehicle. They compared the man's height and build to two main suspects, Kathy's ex-husband and a suspicious man from the memorial, but neither matched the silhouette or the car seen in the video. This left the detectives even more uncertain about the involvement of both men, putting them back at the beginning of their investigation. In the following days, investigators continued to review the footage, hoping to find useful clues and identify new suspects. However, their efforts yielded no significant results, and the case reached a frustrating standstill once again. Then, on December 15th, a breakthrough occurred. That morning, a caretaker checking on an elderly couple, Sydney and Billy Shelton, called the police after noticing something was off when she arrived at their home. The front door was wide open, and there were obvious signs of forced entry at the lock. Upon entering the house, she went to the bedroom and was met with a horrifying scene. The couple was lying motionless in a pool of blood. Without delay, she contacted the police. Medical examiners later confirmed that both victims had been stabbed multiple times, just like Kathy. Detectives also observed a disturbing detail. Their jewelry box had been ransacked, with drawers opened and jewelry missing. Similar to Kathy's case, nothing else of value was taken. The striking parallels between this crime and Kathy's murder could not be overlooked. Investigators suspected from the start that the same perpetrator might be involved. The victims lived only 15 minutes apart. Both attacks occurred at night while they were sleeping, and in each instance, the killer emptied the jewelry boxes but left other valuables behind. From the beginning, investigators suspected that Kathy's murder could be personal, possibly committed by someone she knew. However, they soon had to reconsider this possibility. What if the victims were chosen at random for some unknown reason? Detectives searched for any links between Kathy and the Sheltons' common friends, places they frequented, anything that could connect them. Unfortunately, they found nothing. Their lives had never overlapped. This led to a frightening realization. They might be facing a serial killer. Suddenly, the case was not just about solving a murder. It turned into a race against time before he struck again. Police reached out to everyone connected to the victims, hoping someone would remember even the smallest detail that could help them identify the killer. They encouraged people to share any information, no matter how trivial it seemed, and, eventually, this approach proved effective. One of Kathy's friends recalled a conversation they had a few months prior to her murder. Kathy had mentioned an uncomfortable encounter with a handyman hired by her landlord to perform repairs at her house. She expressed that not only was the work done poorly, but the handyman's behavior also made her feel uneasy. Detectives reached out to the landlord, who helped them find the worker's contact information. This led them to a local resident named Timothy Parlin. They quickly learned that Timothy's brother regularly attended the church where the Sheltons were members, and Timothy himself had also been seen there. As they researched Timothy's background, they discovered something troubling. He had a criminal record with multiple arrests for theft, primarily targeting jewelry. At the time of the investigation, Timothy was on parole and staying in a long-term hotel. When detectives visited him, he agreed to answer their questions but requested to talk outside in the hotel parking lot instead of in his room. Initially, Timothy claimed not to remember Kathy, but as detectives provided more details, he recalled doing some repair work at her house. He firmly stated he was not involved in her murder and provided an alibi, saying he was working the night shift at a convenience store when Kathy was killed. However, detectives noticed discrepancies. Timothy was much shorter than the figure seen in the thermal camera footage, and his car did not match the one observed that night. With no concrete evidence to link him to the crime, they left without any further leads. An unexpected turn of events occurred. When detectives checked Timothy's alibi with his employer, they found out he had been fired a week before Kathy's murder, indicating he couldn't have been at work that night. The detectives hurried back to the hotel, but Timothy had already left. His wife answered the door and let them search their room, leading to a significant discovery. They found a pawn shop receipt showing Timothy had sold jewelry on the same day as Kathy's murder. The detectives went directly to the pawn shop and confirmed that the jewelry belonged to Kathy. Additionally, security footage from the shop's parking lot revealed that Timothy had not arrived in his own car, indicating he was using another vehicle. Upon checking the license plates, the police discovered the car belonged to Timothy's sister. This was vital because it closely resembled the car seen on the thermal camera the night of Kathy's murder. With this information, detectives obtained a warrant to search the vehicle. Forensic experts then examined the car and found blood traces on the front seat and floor. Lab results confirmed the blood belonged to Kathy. Police arrested Timothy and brought him in for questioning. Despite facing substantial evidence, he refused to confess and kept repeating, "These hands have never killed anyone." The detectives interrogated him for hours, pressing him on the evidence, and eventually, he began to crack, but not in the way they anticipated. He maintained his innocence, but claimed to know the actual murderer, a man named Sean Gant Benalcazar. Investigators were doubtful. The case against Timothy was strong, and his sudden shift in blame seemed like a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility. Nevertheless, they decided to investigate Sean as a precaution. The evidence they uncovered did not indicate that Sean was a murderer. Sean, a 30-year-old former science teacher with a degree in microbiology, had no criminal history and lived several hundred miles away from Austin, making his connection to the case seem unlikely. However, detectives wanted to be completely certain, so they traveled to his town to interview him. During the questioning, Sean acknowledged that he had met Timothy a few months earlier and found him to be suspicious. Although they hadn't communicated much since then, Sean made a surprising revelation. He had been in Austin on the nights of both murders. Furthermore, he disclosed that he had stayed at Timothy's house during that time, adding to the confusion of the situation. Initially, Sean stated that Timothy left the house without saying anything on the night Kathy was murdered. However, just minutes later, he changed his account and admitted they had gone to Kathy's house together. He claimed that Timothy got out of the car and came back a few minutes later with a bag that was stained with blood. When Sean looked inside the bag, he saw some jewelry. At that moment, he understood that Timothy had done something awful, but he maintained that he had no knowledge of what would happen and had never intended to be involved in any crime. As detectives continued to question Sean, he requested to use the restroom, and they allowed him to leave the room? One of the investigators observed him as he walked away and realized that his stride, posture, and movements were strikingly similar to the figure seen on the thermal camera the night Kathy was murdered. This observation raised serious doubts about Sean's honesty. The detectives began to strongly suspect that Sean might be the actual killer, but without a confession, they lacked solid evidence to build a case against him. In contrast, they had some physical evidence linking Timothy to the crime, but with Sean, they had nothing at all. When he came back from the restroom, they continued to question him, doubting his account of what happened. They suggested that they didn't believe he had simply stayed in the car and even implied that Timothy might have forced him into Kathy's house under threat. This tactic worked, and after some hesitation, Sean finally confessed that he had gone into the house by himself. He said he entered with the intention of stealing valuables, while Timothy waited outside. He mentioned that he slipped in through the unlocked back door and started searching the rooms for items to take. In Kathy's bedroom, he spotted the jewelry box while Kathy was still asleep in bed. Sean initially maintained that he had carefully taken the valuables and left without harming Kathy. He even suggested that Timothy might have returned to the house after the robbery and killed Kathy for unknown reasons. However, the detectives didn't believe him. They discovered blood on the jewelry box, indicating that the killer had taken the valuables only after the murder, which completely contradicted Sean's story. They continued to question him, dismantling his lies one by one, until he finally confessed. Sean admitted to killing Kathy. He claimed that when he entered her bedroom, she woke up and lunged at him. In a panic, he grabbed a knife and stabbed her multiple times. After she was dead, he took the jewelry, hurried out of the house, and got back into his car. Detectives were skeptical of Sean's story. They found it difficult to believe that Kathy had suddenly lunged at him, trying to grab his knife. However, his confession was sufficient to arrest him. To build their case, they collected his shoes and had forensic experts analyze the soles, which matched the bloody footprint found in Kathy's bedroom perfectly. Despite this evidence, there was a significant issue regarding the murder of the elderly couple. When detectives asked Sean about it, his attitude changed completely. He requested a lawyer and refused to answer any more questions. With no direct evidence linking him to that murder, the investigators faced a dead end. They returned to Timothy, who had been arrested as an accomplice in Kathy's murder. Under Texas law, this meant he faced the same charges as Sean, even though he did not physically take part in the killing. Timothy acknowledged that he drove Sean to Kathy's house, but insisted he never got out of the car and had no idea Sean intended to kill her. However, he admitted to selling Kathy's stolen jewelry, which linked him directly to the crime. When detectives questioned him about the murder of Shelton's, he confessed that he and Sean had gone there to rob the house as well. Again, he maintained that he stayed in the car while Sean entered the house. Investigators looked into the possibility that Timothy was being honest. The thermal camera footage from Kathy's murder clearly showed only one person leaving the vehicle. If the same situation occurred in the second crime, it suggested that Sean had acted alone again. Ultimately, Timothy was charged with all three murders because of his involvement, despite not having directly committed the killings. Meanwhile, Sean faced official charges for Kathy's murder, but detectives had not yet been able to prove his connection to the second case. The court decided that Timothy and Sean would have separate trials. During Timothy's trial, he claimed he was not involved in the murders and was unaware that Sean intended to kill anyone. However, this did not alter the reality that he had driven Sean to both crime scenes and had benefited from selling stolen jewelry belonging to Kathy. Ultimately, in November 2018, the jury found Timothy Parlin guilty, resulting in a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. Sean's trial was considerably more complex. Unlike Timothy, who was connected to Kathy's case through physical evidence, Sean's case relied mainly on his confession, a shoe print discovered in Kathy's bedroom, and footage from thermal cameras. His lawyer quickly challenged the evidence, arguing that detectives had forced Sean to confess and pressured him to accept responsibility for a crime he didn't commit. The lawyer also maintained that the other evidence was merely circumstantial. Consequently, the jury was unable to agree on a verdict, leading the judge to declare a mistrial, Prosecutors continued their efforts, and a few months later, Sean faced a second trial. This time, the jury was persuaded of his guilt, and he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for Kathy's murder. Although there were strong suspicions regarding the murders of Billy and Sidney Shelton, he was never officially charged with those crimes. Investigators remain convinced of his involvement, but they lack sufficient evidence to file charges. In the end, both men faced justice, but many questions remained unanswered. Detectives could not figure out why Sean had killed his victims. If Kathy had truly woken up while he was in her bedroom, he could have easily escaped since it was completely dark, and she wouldn't have been able to identify him. It was clear that a simple burglary had turned into a brutal murder. Detectives struggled to understand the motive behind Billy and Sidney Shelton's deaths. They speculated that Sean might have had some interaction with them at church, possibly leading to a conflict that sparked his resentment, similar to what occurred with Kathy. However, this was just guesswork. In Sean's case, investigators could not dismiss the idea that he may have had no motive and simply wanted to kill. If that was true, it was likely he would have continued his spree if he hadn't been apprehended.